In the Perdium estate in the kingdom of Lithuania, our protagonist woke up gasping for air, unsure of what had just happened. Realizing he was still breathing, he was shocked and confused, certain he should be dead. Just moments before he had been beaten to death, his enemy had disarmed him, and his body was covered in blood from a deep slash. As his life slipped away, his enemy taunted him, calling him Ghislaine Perdium, the mercenary king and one of the continent's 7 strongest men. Idun, one of the top 7 noble knights, stood over him and declared the war was over. He asked Ghislaine if he had any last words. Ghislaine in response said nothing except that it was a shame he couldn't fulfill his revenge. He cursed Idun, calling him a sickening bastard and telling him to die. Unfazed, Idun mocked Ghislaine's arrogance and mentioned that he hadn't expected him to be the eldest son of the fallen Perdium household. He then asked if it was true that Ghislaine left his family after his sister died. Shocked, Ghislaine demanded to know how Idun had learned that, given that they were from different kingdoms. Idun revealed that of course he knew. He had worked tirelessly to track Ghislaine down. They, along with the Delphine household, were the ones responsible for bringing down his family. Ghislaine was stunned by Idun's words, realizing there were others involved beyond Duke Delphine's household. Idun dismissed further explanation, telling Ghislaine it was pointless since he was about to die. Enraged, Ghislaine swore he would never forgive Idun, but the knight merely laughed and swiftly beheaded him. After reading about Ghislaine's transformation from a dismissed and reclusive son into a strategic mastermind, how do you think his past struggles and the betrayal by his own family shaped his actions in this pivotal moment? Do you believe his calculated rise is a form of revenge or a quest for recognition? And that was when Ghislaine had woken up. Looking at his reflection in the water, he was bewildered. He had been decapitated, yet his head was still firmly attached to his body. Running his hands over his face, he realized he was in his younger form. Gazing around, he wondered if he had been captured and used in some experiment by mages. Furious, he swore that those arrogant bastards would regret keeping him alive. Suddenly someone rushed into the tent calling him young master. It was Ricardo, a soldier of the Perdium household, who told him to come out, knowing he was awake. Before Ricardo could say more, Ghislaine drew his blade, holding it near Ricardo's throat. He threatened to spare his life if he answered his questions, or perhaps not. Glaring at him with fury, Ricardo, sweating in fear and confusion, sighed in frustration and asked Ghislaine if he didn't think this was crossing the line. Ghislaine was baffled by Ricardo's response, wondering why Ricardo wasn't reacting more fearfully to his threat. Stuttering, Ghislaine asked Ricardo what he was talking about. Ricardo pushed him away, shouting that Ghislaine had worn himself out with a tantrum earlier and then fallen asleep. Shocked, Ghislaine yelled, asking if he had really done that. Ricardo, exasperated, reminded him that he had thrown a fit about leading the group to raid the orcs, and now he was acting as if he'd forgotten everything after just taking a nap. Ghislaine asks Ricardo what he means by orcs, if he really threw a tantrum, and what kind of nonsense that is. Ricardo, however, just grabs the bag and chest from the floor, telling Ghislaine to gather his things because people are waiting. Confused, Ghislaine asks where they are going. As Ricardo walks past him, he replies that they're heading to the Perdium estate. Ghislaine is shocked, grabbing Ricardo and shouting for him to repeat himself, which only increases Ricardo's confusion. Ghislaine then asks if he means the fallen Perdium estate. Stepping outside, Ghislaine sees the estate for himself. He's stunned. It truly is the Perdium estate, standing just as it had before, even though he remembered it being reduced to ashes. Ricardo, noticing his shock, quietly asks if he had a nightmare, and warns him that if Count Perdium hears him calling their estate fallen, he could be in serious trouble. Ghislaine pinches his face tightly, trying to see if he's dreaming, but the pain confirms that this is real. Then, looking at his younger reflection and the estate in its original state, Ghislaine begins to suspect he's traveled back in time. He recalls how his younger self had resented the household, how his immaturity, born from feelings of inferiority, led to countless troubles. Over time, the household began to avoid him, and unable to bear the criticism, he ran away. Several years later, he had become a mercenary, survived countless battles, and gained fame and skill. He eventually returned to Perdium, hoping to atone for his past mistakes. But by then, the estate had been destroyed, and he had lost everything. But now it was all still here, and everyone he had lost was still alive. A smile crept across his face. He could hardly believe it. He wanted to sing for joy, but he knew it was too early to celebrate. He then turns to Ricardo, recalling that he had mentioned a raid on the orcs. Ghislaine realizes that this day can't be forgotten. He remembers it all too well. It was the day that most of the raid squad would die. In his past life, he had joined the raid, eager to make a name for himself. The report had claimed there were only 3 orcs, and he thought it would be a simple task, even though he had no experience commanding a squad. But when they arrived, they found more than 20 orcs waiting. His stubbornness and inexperience had cost them dearly, as almost everyone in the squad had died. As Ghislaine straps his armor on, he reassures himself that this time should be different. After all, the orcs didn't use any special tactics, they just overwhelmed them with numbers. The real problem, he knew, was whether anyone would trust him, since most people thought of him as a useless brat. Suddenly, the tower ahead was destroyed, crashing to the ground before him, and one of the knights shouted that the orcs were already attacking. Huge orcs with axes were charging toward the camp. Ghislaine was surprised. They had arrived even faster than in his past life. The orcs easily cut down the knights who tried to stop them, causing the rest to flee in terror. A commander's voice ordered the knights to form up, and Scoven, the squad commander, ran forward, shouting for everyone not to panic and to form a defensive line. Before Scoven could reach the front, one of the orcs charged at him, knocking him off balance. Scoven quickly realized they had been ambushed while unprepared, and there were far more orcs than expected. At this rate, everyone would be slaughtered. Just then, someone shouted a warning, and Skovan looked back, seeing an orc behind him. Gunturgus dashed forward at full speed, grabbed Skovan by the shoulder, and shoved him aside. Skovan, shocked and confused, watched as the tantrum-throwing young master swung his sword directly at the orc, who was about to bring down its axe. Gracelane struck the orc's hand before the axe could hit, then, with a single swing, severed half the orc's arm. Skovan and the knight stood frozen in disbelief. The orc screamed in agony and collapsed to the ground. Gracelane, shaking the blood off his sword, cursed under his breath. He was frustrated that he couldn't use mana, and wished he had returned to the past sooner. The atmosphere grew tense as Ghislaine's footsteps echoed across the room, each step deliberate and purposeful as he approached Skovan. His presence seemed to fill the space, demanding attention from everyone present. With calculated precision, Ghislaine first sought confirmation of what he already suspected, that Skovan held the position of commander. However, this was merely a prelude to his true intention. The request that followed left Skovan visibly shaken, his usual composure crumbling in the face of such an unexpected demand. Caught off guard, Skovan struggled to form a coherent response, his words coming out in a confused stammer as he attempted to make sense of Gracelaine's request. His apology hung in the air, tinged with both respect and bewilderment, as he admitted his inability to comprehend what was being asked of him. Ghislaine's patience wore thin at Skovan's confusion. His voice took on a razor-sharp edge, cutting through any pretense of ambiguity. With cold clarity, he spelled out his demand. He wanted the commander's authority transferred to him. The words feel heavy in the room, their weight amplified by Ghislaine's tone, which left no room for misinterpretation. The simple request carried complex implications, challenging the established order and leaving Skovan to grapple with a decision that could have far-reaching consequences. Skovan could hardly contain his frustration as he faced Ghislaine's outrageous request. Though he had long known of the young master's foolishness, this latest demand crossed a line he couldn't ignore. With soldiers' lives hanging in the balance, Ghislaine's casual request for command authority struck Skovan as both reckless and deeply concerning. Rising to his feet with deliberate slowness, Skovan's firm denial cut through the tension in the room. The single word can't fell from his lips like a stone, visibly rattling Ghislaine's composure. The young master's face contorted with indignation as he struggled to comprehend this defiance, demanding an explanation for Skovan's refusal. As Skovan strode forward, his footsteps echoing in the charged silence, he fixed Ghislaine with a stern gaze. He pointed out the gravity of the situation. This was no child's game to be played on a whim. Despite Ghislaine's status as the young master, Skovan explained that the authority bestowed upon him by the Lord himself wasn't something to be carelessly handed over. His voice carried the weight of responsibility, attempting to make Ghislaine understand that leadership in matters of life and death required more than just a noble title. Ghislaine was irritated, but deep down he knew he would have reacted the same way if an inexperienced idiot had asked him to hand over command. Just then, another orc appeared, charging straight toward them. Skovan rushed to the front, shouting for Ghislaine to fall back, claiming that he'd handle it, and that Ghislaine was too inexperienced to lead. Ghislaine, however, swung his sword backward, muttering that he had no choice. He then hurled it forward. Fortunately, Skovan tilted his head just in time to avoid the blade. Furious, Skovan grabbed Ghislaine's shirt, shouting at him, "What do you think you're doing?" Before Ghislaine could respond, a pained scream caught Skovan's attention. He turned to see the orc lying dead on the ground, Ghislaine's sword buried deep in its skull. Skovan was stunned. He couldn't believe Ghislaine had managed to strike the orc in its weak spot. Ghislaine asked Skovan if he was right in assuming he was the commander, then added, "Do you know what the most important thing in battle is?" He glanced at the knights, trembling in fear as they faced the rampaging orcs. Ghislaine continued, "There's no hope in winning a battle when your troops are filled with fear. They need to gain momentum." Without waiting for a response, Ghislaine dashed forward, grabbed the sword from the orc's head, and moving with incredible speed, leapt toward the orcs, landing directly on the head of the lead orc, his sword piercing through its skull. Everyone was stunned as he pulled his sword out. Ghislaine taunted the orcs, telling them to come at him. He then shouted that he'd kill every last one of them. Furious, the orcs charged at him in a rage, but Ghislaine met them head-on. He slashed at the nearest orc, rolled to dodge an attack, and severed another orc's arm in one swift movement. With incredible speed, he continued cutting down orcs left and right, their bodies falling in pieces all around him. Skovan, who witnessed it all, could hardly believe his eyes. He wondered if he was dreaming, knowing that even as a mana user, he struggled to fight like that. He marveled at how the skinny young master Ghislaine was doing it all. Skovan noticed Ghislaine was clearly tired, but also realized that Ghislaine was using the smallest, most efficient movements to dodge attacks. His swordsmanship was precise, striking at the orc's weak spots as if he were a master swordsman, despite not using any mana. Perhaps Skovan thought he was even greater than a typical swordmaster. Ghislaine then teased the orcs, asking if that was the best they could do, taunting them that he wasn't even warmed up yet. He dodged their attacks with ease, then turned and ran, shouting over his shoulder that they were failing to live up to their reputation as a warrior species. Enraged, the orcs charged after him, in a blind fury. Ricardo shouted in panic, "All the orcs are chasing the young master." One of the knights asked if Ghislaine was running away, unsure of what was happening. Ricardo, worried, called out to Skovan, but Skovan just stood there watching Ghislaine closely, wondering what in the world he was thinking. Skovan realized that while drawing the orcs' attention had been a good tactic, running away toward the edge of the cliff seemed like madness. But then, as he saw the cliff in the distance, something clicked. Skovan immediately ordered the knights to form a shield wall, and told them they'd follow the first sun. As the orcs continued chasing him, Ghislaine neared the cliff and turned to face them. confident that Scoven would recognize his plan if he was a skilled commander. While Ghislaine would have preferred to cut them all down himself, he knew his poor stamina wouldn't allow it. However, he was sure the rest of the squad would be able to handle the situation from there. As the knights positioned themselves behind the orcs ready for action, Ghislaine smiled, thinking everything was falling into place. He jumped off the cliff and gave the signal to Scovan. Immediately, Scoven ordered his troops to push the orcs off the cliff. The knights obeyed, using their shields and spears to drive the massive orcs over the edge. They gave it their all, and one by one the orcs fell, their bodies crashing down hopelessly and being crushed upon impact. The breathless knights could hardly believe they had succeeded, having managed to kill all the orcs. Scoven rushed to the cliff's edge, shouting for Ghislaine. To his relief, Ghislaine had managed to pierce his sword into the cliff side and was hanging on. Ghislaine smiled up at him, and Scoven, though surprised, smiled back. Reaching out, Scoven told him to grab his hand, but just as Ghislaine replied, his grip slipped. Unable to hold on, he plummeted down the cliff, leaving the knights horrified, screaming his name in panic. As Ghislaine fell, he dreamed of his younger sister calling him. He asked if she was Elena, but then flashes of memories came rushing back, Elena crying, asking about their mother, thanking him with a smile, angrily questioning his behavior and declaring he was the worst. These memories of Elena flooded his mind. Suddenly, someone grabbed him, calling him brother, and when he turned he saw Elena shouting that they should go together. Ghislaine awoke in his room, realizing he was still alive. He assumed the knights had somehow managed to save him. As he sat up, he wondered if everything had been a dream, but the pain in his body told him otherwise. He guessed the pain was the consequence of pushing himself beyond his limits, though it also reassured him that he was indeed alive. Just then, someone entered the room, his maid Belinda, who excitedly informed him that he was awake. Ghislaine was surprised to see her. She immediately began scolding him, reminding him of how worried she had been, and how she had warned him to let the knights handle the orcs. Without warning, Ghislaine hugged her tightly. Startled, she asked what he was doing, and if she had done something wrong, but he simply replied that he was just happy to see her. Belinda had been his personal tutor since childhood, and the only one who stayed by his side despite his foolishness. After their family's downfall, she had disappeared, and he had never seen her again until now. Seeing her again filled him with a mix of relief and joy, emotions he never thought he'd feel again. Belinda, however, was confused, asking why he was so happy when they saw each other every day. Ghislaine realized he needed to tell her the truth. He explained that a catastrophe would soon strike Perdium, shocking her. She asked what he was talking about, to which he replied that he had died and come back to life. However, Belinda playfully dismissed his claim, teasing him that it was probably just the orcs that almost killed him. Ghislaine tried to clarify, but she shifted the conversation, pointing out that he, not Perdium, was the one in greater danger. She then launched into a lecture about all the things he had done wrong, making Ghislaine realize she didn't believe him at all. Accepting that convincing her was futile, he gave up on the subject. Belinda then asked what he was going to do if he was too injured to attend the upcoming festival. Ghislaine, confused, asked what she meant, but Belinda reminded him about the festival, wondering how he could have forgotten. She pointed out that Elena had been looking forward to attending the festival with him, seeing it as a chance for them to become close again. Looking at a nearby photo of him and Elena, Ghislaine recalled the festival that always occurred around this time of year. In his previous life, he had never had the chance to enjoy festivals, haunted by trauma. Ghislaine then asked Belinda how long it was until the festival, to which she replied that it was only a week away. He became serious, knowing that this festival marked a day that would change his life forever. Elena then entered his room, calling out to see if he was there. Ghislaine looked at her, his mind swirling with the memory that continued to haunt him. The weight of terrible knowledge pressed down on Growlin. In just 7 days, Elena's life would come to an end. This grim certainty drove him to act on impulse, wrapping his arms around her in a desperate embrace that caught both Elena and the silently observing Belinda completely off guard. The sudden display of affection left Elena flustered and confused, her words tumbling out in a nervous stammer as she tried to make sense of his unusual behavior. She questioned if this was some kind of joke, her face flushed with embarrassment at the unexpected contact. Ghislaine's response was simple, yet heavy with hidden meaning. He merely expressed how much he had missed her, though the words carried the weight of his unspoken knowledge. Overwhelmed by the strange situation, Elena's embarrassment quickly turned to discomfort. She forcefully pushed him away, her voice rising as she declared how unsettling his actions were. Throughout this exchange, Belinda remained a silent spectator, watching the scene unfold with unreadable eyes. The force of Elena's rejection left Ghislaine coughing in pain, taken aback by the surprising strength housed in her small frame. As he recovered from the shock, he found himself wondering if she had always possessed such physical power, or if his memory had failed to capture this aspect of her. The moment served as a stark reminder that despite his knowledge of her fate, there were still things about Elena that could surprise him. A bitter irony given the limited time she had left. Elena then mentioned that Belinda had asked her to come and questioned what kind of game he was playing, asking if he thought it would make everything okay. Confused, Ghislaine asked what she was talking about. Elena reminded him that he had once told her to piss off because she was annoying, adding that he had even said her presence was disgusting. Ghislaine was taken aback, unable to believe he had said something so cruel to her. Feeling awkward, Ghislaine apologized, fully aware that he hadn't been close to Elena in his previous life and had acted like a complete piece of trash. His unexpected apology left both Elena and Belinda speechless. Elena, still in disbelief, asked if his head had been injured since she had heard that an orc had knocked him out. Irritated by the remark, Ghislaine tried to explain himself, but he suddenly felt a sharp pain throughout his body and dropped to his knees. Elena, teasing him, remarked that his condition proved her point. reminding him that he had returned unconscious. But when Ghislaine looked up, he saw both of them laughing at him sweetly. A smile formed on his face as he realized how much he had missed these moments. He couldn't help but wonder why his past self had wasted so much time on trivial things. The upcoming festival resurfaced in his mind, the one where he had rejected Elena's offer to attend together, using the raid squad incident as an excuse. That festival had been the last time he ever saw her, and shortly after, her body had been found mutilated, along with her bodyguards. He clenched his clothes in anger, knowing that he should have been with her. Just then, a knock came at the door, and two bodyguards, Jamal and Philip, entered, calling for Elena. She asked if something had happened, and reminded them she had asked them to wait outside. Jamal apologized, explaining that a servant had requested Elena's oversight of the festival preparations. Ghislaine, confused, asked why Elena would be asked to handle such matters. Belinda chimed in, teasing him that he wouldn't know because he had always been lazy, noting how strange it was that there was such a shortage of workers in Perdium that even the young lady had to step in. As Elena headed out, she told Ghislaine to take care of himself. Still wondering about the shortage of workers, Ghislaine realized that in his past life, he had never cared about such things. Wanting to be more involved this time, he offered to help, surprising Elena. Belinda, equally shocked, asked if he was serious, while Elena questioned if he had indeed suffered a head injury. A short while later, as they moved through the busy street, Ghislaine called out to Elena, reminding her that he had offered to help. Elena shouted back, telling him to go away and warning that people were too frightened to work with him around, which drew the attention of everyone nearby. Annoyed, Ghislaine asked if this was how she treated someone who wanted to help. Elena pushed him away again, insisting that the best way for him to help was to stay out of the way and avoid causing trouble. As she pushed him aside, Ghislaine's thoughts turned to the memory of her death. Her body had been found near the slums, far from the festival grounds. He deduced that someone must have lured her there or forcibly moved her. To prevent this from happening, he realized he needed to learn more about the ins and outs of the estate. Suddenly someone rushed over to them, and Ghislaine recognized the man's face. It was Fergus, an old knight. Fergus, visibly relieved, expressed his gratitude that Ghislaine was safe, tearfully explaining that he had come as soon as he heard about the orc attack. Ghislaine, trying to brush it off, told Fergus to stop talking about it. However, Elena seized the moment, telling Fergus that Ghislaine had been acting strangely since waking up and ordering him to escort her brother back to his room. Fergus, loyal as ever, agreed, much to Ghislaine's frustration. Once again, his past reputation as a hooligan was getting in the way of him being taken seriously. Ghislaine realized that there was no point in arguing and accepted that he would get a better sense of what was happening around the castle in the following week. He then asked Fergus if he was correct in recalling an abandoned training field in the castle, and ordered him to take him there. Fergus, surprised, asked why he wanted to go to the training field. Ghislaine simply replied that he intended to train, which shocked Fergus even more. Despite his surprise, Fergus led him to the training field. Upon arrival, Ghislaine was surprised to find the field in much better condition than he had expected. He glanced around at the weapons and facilities, realizing it was a perfectly suitable place for him to train, better than anything he had encountered even as a mercenary. Fergus explained that the area had been maintained in case Ghislaine ever wished to use it, and added that he assumed Ghislaine's interest in training was just a passing phase. Ghislaine then wondered if, in his past life, Fergus had been the one maintaining the facilities and cleaning the weapons for him, and came to the realization that it was likely true. With a light tap on Fergus's shoulder, Ghislaine jokingly told him that he needed to live a long life, as dying really felt like a terrible experience. Fergus, somewhat confused, responded that Ghislaine was speaking as if he had already experienced life and death. Ghislaine, with a grin, confirmed that Fergus was sharp. He had indeed died and been resurrected. Fergus, however, dismissed it as nonsense. Changing the subject, Ghislaine told Fergus he could head back as he was about to start training. Fergus, bowing in respect, assured him he would be just outside if needed. As Fergus left, Ghislaine reflected on how he had once treated everyone around him as enemies. He now realized how short-sighted he had been. His thoughts turned to the week ahead, remembering that in his previous life it had been revealed that a neighboring lord was behind Elena's death. This event had dragged the Perdium family into a war that eventually led to their downfall. Elena's death had been the catalyst for everything, and now Ghislaine knew he had to set things right. Starting from there, sitting in the middle of the training ground, Ghislaine knew that the first thing he needed was to improve his physical condition. While time was short, he knew he could at least regain control over his mana. Inhaling deeply, he began to gather mana around him. Mana, a supernatural force, allowed humans to surpass their natural limits. Most people struggled with the process of detecting and drawing in mana, but for Ghislaine it came naturally, even in the chaos of battle. Ghislaine concentrated on connecting the mana particles floating in the air, bundling them together as if he were spinning a spool. With his experience from thousands of battles, creating a mana core, a concentrated point of energy, was effortless. However, he knew that simply forming a mana core wasn't enough. In his previous life, he had learned from a half-burned magic book how to create multiple cores within his body, far exceeding the typical limits. Using this technique, he could form a second and even a third core, weaving them together into a powerful mesh that produced explosive force. As he pushed his body to form 3 cores simultaneously, the pain became intense, but Ghislaine endured it. Blood began to pour from his nose and mouth, a sign that his body was nearing its limit. Even though he had managed to create 5 cores in his past life, he knew that for now, 3 was his current limit. The strain on his body was immense, but the method he used granted him immense power in a short period of time, though it required an enormous amount of mana in return. Exhausted and bleeding, Ghislaine recalled that the primary reason he lost to Aiden in his past life was because he ran out of mana. He knew that if it had been a fair fight, he would have won. However, Aidan had brought an entire night order to fight him when he was depleted. While Ghislaine was aware that his current technique was unstable, it was enough for now, especially given his youthful body and the time he had on his side. As he stood up, he silently vowed to himself that this time he would take Aidan's head. He also swore to destroy those bastards behind House Deline, the ones who had helped ruin his family. 1 week later, on the day of the festival, Ghislaine strapped his weapon belt tightly around his waist and secured some explosives alongside his sword. As he stepped into the streets where the festival was in full swing, Elena spotted him and was taken aback. She expressed her surprise that he had actually come, noting that he had never attended such events before when she asked what had changed. He simply replied that as a member of the Perdium family, he should attend festivals from time to time. Elena observed that he had been acting strangely lately, adding that she had heard he had done nothing but train all week. Ghislaine brushed it off, asking what was so unusual about the next in line of a nightly family training. Elena reminded him that he hadn't cared about such things before, and pointed out that he had once complained about their father, even saying that he wished to be the Lord already. Her words hit him hard. However, she then cheerfully turned around and told him she liked the way he was now, as it reminded her of the olden. Ghislaine remained silent, staring at her while reflecting on what he had realized over the past week. His actions had changed, and as a result, his interactions with people and the course of events were beginning to shift as well. He understood that while the general flow of the future might remain the same, the small details were already being altered. Ghislaine knew that using his knowledge of the future wisely was his responsibility, and he had to respond to each situation carefully. Reassuring himself, he touched the explosives on his belt, confirming that his preparations were complete. He spent the evening following Elena around as she negotiated with a baker over the price of bread and explored the festival with her. Hours passed, and as they finally sat down to rest, Elena sweetly mentioned that the festival had been fun, but it was starting to feel repetitive, like every other year. She wondered aloud if there was anything new happening that night, but Ghislaine remained quiet, staying alert. Even though the festival was nearing its end, nothing had happened yet, and he started to wonder if his presence with Elena had somehow altered events. But then someone approached Elena, asking if she wanted to check out other areas. Ghislaine's attention sharpened. Jamal, one of their house's bodyguards, suggested to Elena that according to a friend, there were new events happening elsewhere and asked if she wanted to see them. Elena, excited by the idea, agreed and followed Jamal, saying it had better be fun. As Ghislaine watched them, a cold realization hit him. It was them, the traitors of their house. Among the noble house's knights, none were more dedicated than Jamal and Philly, who had stood as Elena's guardian since her earliest days. Their unwavering loyalty had earned them a special place in the feudal hierarchy, trusted above all others with the young lady's safety. Yet a dark shadow loomed over their devotion. In another timeline, another life, these brave knights had met a tragic end while fulfilling their sacred duty to protect Elena, sacrificing everything in their desperate attempt to keep her safe. The small group's journey came to an end as they reached their destination, with Jamal's cheerful announcement breaking the thoughtful silence. However, his upbeat tone stood in stark contrast to the scene before them. Where there should have been life and activity, only desolation greeted their eyes. The location was a haunting sight. Market stalls lay in ruins, their splintered wood telling tales of abandonment and decay. Houses stood empty and lifeless, their windows dark and uninviting, like hollow eyes staring out at the visitors. The eerie stillness of the deserted area sent a chill through the air, making their surroundings feel more like a graveyard of forgotten dreams than a place where people once lived and worked. The contrast between Jamal's cheerful demeanor and the grim reality of their surroundings only served to heighten the sense of unease, leaving unspoken questions hanging in the desolate air about what could have caused such complete abandonment. Elena looked around in disappointment, questioning what it was, and expressing doubt that there would be a performance in such a rundown area. Jamal responded that they probably weren't ready yet, and he was sure people would arrive soon. Elena, annoyed, shouted at Jamal, asking if he really believed anyone would perform in such a dirty place. This was exactly what Greatwine had expected. He scanned the area, noting that while it seemed like a simple deserted street at first glance, the obstacles blocking escape routes were strategically placed, they had prepared in advance. Suddenly, Elena grabbed Ghislaine's arm, telling him they should leave. Jamal tried to stop her, suggesting they should at least wait to see the show, but she firmly dragged Ghislaine away, refusing to stay in such a place. Ghislaine, surprised by her strength, jokingly asked if she had been working out. She glanced back at him in confusion, not noticing that she had bumped into Philip. Philip, visibly annoyed, told her they should wait a little longer. Elena, horrified by their strange behavior, asked what was wrong with them. Jamal, trying to calm her, explained in an unnerving tone that they had simply received a reasonable request. Shocked, Elena demanded to know what Jamal meant by a request. Before she could process it, 3 men appeared approaching them. The leader, Frank, commended Jamal and Philip for their clean work. Jamal, proud, confirmed that they had brought the young lady as promised and suggested they conclude the deal. However, Frank's eyes narrowed when he noticed Ghislaine. He asked the bodyguards why Ghislaine was there, pointing out that he had never requested the eldest son of the Perdium family. Elena, now trembling with fear, stood close to Ghislaine. As Elena's fear grows and the tension thickens, the group faces an unexpected betrayal. What do you think is behind Jamal and Philly's strange behavior? Are they truly loyal, or is there a deeper secret at play? Jamal dismissed the concern, saying they could hand Ghislaine over for free, explaining that he had foolishly followed them without realizing he was walking into his own grave. Ghislaine, furious, demanded to know if Jamal had really betrayed them and whether he thought he could get away with it. Jamal, smirking, taunted him, suggesting that Ghislaine should worry about his own fate. He revealed that they were simply tired of Pum's impoverished land, plagued by barbarian attacks, and that many others were likely fleeing as well. Without warning, Ghislaine slashed at Jamal, cutting him in half before he could fully comprehend what had happened. Philip and Frank were stunned. Unable to believe what they had just witnessed, Ghislaine coldly told Jamal that, unlike him, at least they had never betrayed their family. He then turned to Philly, asking if he shared Jamal's foolishness. Panicking, Philip grabbed Elena, using her as a hostage while cursing Jamal for being an idiot and losing to an amateur. But before Philip could draw his sword, Ghislaine's blade pierced through the middle of his head. As Philip collapsed, his final words were a stunned declaration that it was impossible. He fell to the ground lifeless. Elena, shaken and terrified, rushed to Ghislaine, hugging him tightly in fear. The man with Frank hesitated, asking if Frank was certain this was truly the eldest son of Perdium. They had always heard that Ghislaine had no real combat experience or formal training. Frank, however, was convinced, judging by Ghislaine's appearance and the fact that he had instantly killed 2 knights using mana-infused attacks. There was no doubt in his mind. Frank acknowledged that they had been caught off guard, but noted Ghislaine's unexpected skill. Elena, terrified, stuttering, only asked Ghislaine what was happening, but he remained silent. Without a word, he struck Elena on the nape, rendering her unconscious. Gently he laid her down, telling her to rest for a bit. Frank, now amused, thanked Ghislaine for doing their work for them, mockingly calling him the eldest son of Perem. He and his men began to approach, remarking that Ghislaine was much different than what they had heard. They had intended to deal with Jamal and Philip themselves, but Ghislaine had already taken care of that. Frank then asked if Ghislaine had been hiding his true skills all along. Ghislaine, unfazed, pulled his sword from Philip's head and asked Frank why it mattered. As Ghislaine shook the blood from his sword, he assessed the situation. There were 3 enemies, 2 of them insignificant. But Frank, standing in the middle, emanated a much stronger level of mana. Realizing he needed to finish this quickly, Ghislaine released his own mana, created Mana Thread, and began walking toward them. He asked Frank whose request it was to capture Elena, but Frank dismissed the question, saying there was no need for a dead man to know. Drelane, knowing Frank wouldn't give up the information easily, responded that it didn't matter. Frank would want to spill it soon enough. One of Frank's men asked if they should sever Ghislaine's head, but Frank refused, ordering them to capture him alive. He instructed them to break every limb in Ghislaine's body to drive him mad. Frank added that Ghislaine's pain would make the final result more satisfying. The men agreed and charged at him. Ghislaine quickly grabbed one of his explosives and threw it at them. One of the men noticed it was a firecracker, but before he could react, Ghislaine's sword had already pierced his forehead, killing him instantly. The other man lunged at Ghislaine from the side, shouting that the explosive was a cheap trick. Ghislaine, however, blocked the attack just in time, blocking the man's sword with his own. Ghislaine skillfully rolled his arm over the opponent's hand, disarming him before decapitating him with a single swift stroke. But then Ghislaine felt a sword nearing the back of his head. Frank had launched a sneak attack. Thanks to his quick reflexes, Ghislaine managed to block it at the last second, preventing what could have been a fatal strike. Frank, astonished that Ghislaine had blocked his attack from such an awkward position, pressed forward. Ghislaine immediately pushed Frank's sword away and spun around, slashing at Frank and managing to cut his neck. Frank's pipe fell and shattered as he stumbled. Ghislaine expected Frank to fall, but to his shock, Frank swung his sword again, still standing despite the wound. Ghislaine blocked the strike with both hands, barely able to hold back the force of the attack. Frank, healing his neck with mana, remarked that if he had been lacking in mana, he would have been decapitated. Ghislaine gritted his teeth, struggling to counter Frank's overwhelming power. He wondered how Frank had survived a strike to the neck, suspecting that he had concentrated his mana in that area to reduce the damage. As Frank charged his mana into his sword, he commented on Ghislaine's unusual swordsmanship for someone so young. Frank assured him that regardless of how he had learned it, Ghislaine's journey would end there. Yet Ghislaine merely smiled in response, surprising Frank, who couldn't believe what he was seeing. The clash of steel echoed through the air as Ghislaine executed a series of lightning-fast movements. With precision and grace, he first deflected Frank's blade, then, in a stunning display of agility, thrust his own swords into the earth. Using them as anchors, Ghislaine whirled his body around like a deadly dancer, channeling all his momentum into a devastating kick that connected squarely with Frank's face. The impact was tremendous, sending his opponent reeling backward. Though Frank's years of combat experience allowed him to regain his stance without falling, confident in his superior mana reserves, Frank couldn't resist taunting his opponent. He mockingly pointed out that Ghislaine's depleted mana levels made his attacks practically useless against someone of Frank's caliber. Yet his smug assurance was short-lived. Within moments, an inexplicable agony ripped through Frank's body. He collapsed to his knees, his composure shattered as blood forced its way past his lips. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he stared at them in disbelief, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. A cold realization crept over Frank as he assessed his condition. This outcome defied everything he knew about combat logic. Ghislaine's attack shouldn't have been able to penetrate his mana-enhanced defenses, not with such a vast difference in their skill levels. Something was terribly wrong. And the mystery of how Ghislaine had managed to inflict such damage despite his seemingly disadvantaged state filled Frank with a growing sense of dread. In this moment, Frank began to question whether he had gravely underestimated his opponent's capabilities. Ghislaine walked closer, his presence intense, and told Frank that he hadn't expected to uncover the true culprit behind Elena's death, but now he knew it was Frank. Frank's mana flared with rage as he approached, as Ghislaine released the power of his third mana core. Frank was shocked, shouting in disbelief, demanding to know how Ghislaine had boosted his mana so drastically. Ghislaine didn't answer. Instead, he lunged toward Frank with both swords swinging. Frank, realizing the speed of Ghislaine's assault, barely managed to block each strike, struggling to keep up with the relentless barrage of attacks. Ghislaine poured force into every blow, each swing more powerful than the last. Finally, Ghislaine put all his strength into a decisive strike. Frank blocked it, but the impact was overwhelming. Frank could feel his hands going numb just from the sheer force of defending against Ghislaine's strikes. Cracks began forming on Frank's sword, and he realized that no matter how much mana one gathered, it usually had a limited effect. He had never seen a technique that could increase mana so explosively. Staring at Ghislaine, who was preparing for another attack, Frank felt as if he were facing a completely different person. When Frank tried to block the next attack, his sword shattered into pieces. Gabrielin's blade sliced into Frank's body, sending blood splattering everywhere. Not stopping, Ghislaine launched another attack, stabbing Frank directly in the stomach. Frank coughed up blood, screaming in agony. Ghislaine then pinned Frank against the wall with his arm, demanding that they finish their conversation from earlier. He seriously asked Frank who had requested Elena's assassination, desperate. Frank pulled a hidden knife from his sleeve, determined not to go down easily. He decided to at least take Elena with him, as he aimed the knife at her, ready to throw it. His hand and the knife were suddenly bound by threads. Ghislaine calmly suggested to Frank that they make a deal, warning him not to do anything foolish. He told Frank to answer his question, and in return, he'd sheath his sword. Frank, now immobilized, realized that the threads were infused with mana, preventing him from moving. He recalled Ghislaine releasing those threads earlier, but hadn't paid attention. Then, with cold determination, Ghislaine slid his sword deeper into Frank's stomach. He remarked that someone of Frank's caliber should be able to patch himself up, but it wouldn't matter if he destroyed his manure. Frank's eyes widened in shock as Ghislaine twisted the blade. The pain inside Frank grew unbearable, and his mana begged Ghislaine to scatter, breaking apart under the pressure. Panicking, Frank screamed that Ghislaine was out of his mind, warning that one wrong move could cause a mana backflow leading to a catastrophic explosion that could wipe out the entire area. Ghislaine, however, remained calm, dismissing the threat as something that only applied to the unskilled. He assured Frank that he could manage it. As Frank felt himself breaking, he realized Ghislaine wasn't bluffing. He was going to die. Desperate, Frank shouted that it was Count Desmond who had requested the assassination, explaining that Desmond needed a pretext to start a war against both the Perdium and Dyard families. Ghislaine asked if Frank was telling the truth, recalling that in his previous life, such underground dealings were usually handled by families allied with the Ducal House. His fury grew as he thought of Duke Delian, and how he had orchestrated such madness behind the scenes. He then demanded to know if that was why Elena was targeted. Frank, stammering, confirmed it was true. In response, Ghislaine drove his sword deeper into Frank's stomach until it pierced through and came out the other side. Frank screamed in agony, accusing Ghislaine of going back on his word. But Ghislaine, unfazed, asked him what the issue was, reminding Frank that he had killed plenty of people in his life. Yet now, when it was his turn, he was afraid. Suddenly, Frank let out a loud manic laugh. He pressed his forehead against Ghislaine's and taunted him, saying that nothing would change even if Ghislaine killed him. Frank boasted that his work with the guard was already complete, and questioned if Ghislaine thought anyone would listen to a punk like him. Shouting, Frank declared that Perdium would still fall due to the impending war. But Ghislaine slammed Frank's head against the wall, silencing him. Leaning close, Ghislaine whispered that he had a secret. He had been reborn after dying, and this time, things would be different. Ghislaine then shattered Frank's menorah completely, causing Frank's body to break apart. Just before Frank could explode, the menorah shot up into the sky and detonated like a beautiful firework. Ghislaine, breathing heavily, surveyed the dead bodies around him and glanced back at his sister, still peacefully asleep on the ground. Throwing his sword aside, Ghislaine exhaled, trying to calm himself, but pain racked his body and he collapsed to his knees, vomiting blood. Wiping his mouth, he cursed. Back when he was the Mercenary King, exploding 3 Minoris wouldn't have been a problem, but now it was pushing him to his limits. Forcing himself to stand, he staggered toward a nearby house, shouting that he wouldn't fall like this. Entering the room, Ghislaine found 2 bodies wrapped in white cloth. He walked closer, remembering that in his previous life, another body had been found alongside. Inside Elena's. Based on Frank's words, he realized that the body before him was the son of Degard, cold and lifeless. He then glanced at the other corpse, deducing that it must be young Degard's escort knight. Ghislaine pieced together the plot. The Degard heir and his knight had been killed and framed as Elena's murderers. It was a perfect cover to ignite a war. He knew that if the bodies were discovered, it would trigger the conflict just as it had before. Determined to stop that from happening, Ghislaine pulled out his last fire explosive and set the entire house ablaze, ensuring that the corpses of the Degard heir and the knight were reduced to ashes as the flames consumed the evidence. Ghislaine hoisted Elena onto his back and walked away, resolute that he would not allow things to unfold as they had in the past. Unbeknownst to him, a figure hidden in the branches of a tall tree had been watching the entire scene. As soon as Ghislaine left, the mysterious figure hurriedly slipped away into the night. Shadows danced on the walls of the dimly lit meeting room, as tension hung thick in the air. The space was occupied by figures of considerable influence and power, their silhouettes looming large as they listened to the mysterious messenger deliver his report. As the words "mission failure" left his lips, a wave of shock rippled through the assembly. The news seemed impossible to comprehend. They had dispatched their elite guard knights accompanied by Frank, their most formidable warrior. How could such a carefully planned operation have gone awry? One of the imposing figures leaned forward, his movement causing the wooden chair to creak ominously in the silence. His voice dripped with barely contained anger and disbelief as he questioned the messenger's competence. The mission had appeared straightforward enough. Dealing with a single girl shouldn't have posed any significant challenge for warriors of their caliber. The implication was clear. Someone had grossly underestimated the situation. The mysterious messenger's composure began to crumble under the weight of their scrutiny. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he struggled to explain the unexpected turn of events. His voice quivered as he revealed the source of their failure. It wasn't the girl who had thwarted their plans, but rather the intervention of Gracelyn. The name fell like a stone in the quiet room, leaving the powerful figures to grapple with the realization that they had overlooked a crucial variable in their calculations, one that had cost them dearly. Confused, the room fell silent for a moment. Everyone exchanged puzzled looks, knowing Ghislaine's reputation as a useless bastard from the north. One of the big figures erupted, shouting that Ghislaine was a worthless piece of trash, and accused the mysterious man of using him as an excuse, visibly shaking. The mysterious man insisted that Ghislaine was completely different from the rumors and information they had. He recalled Ghislaine's powerful mana, the ease with which he killed the knights, defended against Frank, made Frank spill secrets, destroyed his menorah, and erased all the evidence. He explained to the room that Ghislaine seemed like a completely different person, but the man added they had already dealt with the Degard family, so there would be no issue in starting the territorial war. He then begged for another chance. The big figures weren't impressed. They shouted at him to shut up, accusing him of failing to gather sufficient intelligence on one kid, botching an easy mission, and now daring to ask for another chance. They angrily declared that the setback was too great, and demanded the mysterious man's elimination. Suddenly, the boss spoke up, his calm voice cutting through the noise. Everyone fell silent. The boss then turned to the mysterious man, and asked what kind of chance he wanted. Stuttering, the man replied that he would take care of Ghislaine. The boss asked how he planned to do it, and the man explained that he would orchestrate a duel. Naturally, the mysterious man then revealed that he had someone in mind, piquing everyone's curiosity. When asked who it was, he replied that it was Cain Lowe's, a swordsman famous for his strength-based swordsmanship. Despite Cain's young age, he was considered the epitome of strength. And the mysterious man confidently stated that no one in the north could match Cain's raw power. He added that Cain was Golnon's cousin, so it wouldn't be difficult to arrange a meeting between them, surprising the room. The boss agreed to the plan, but warned the mysterious man that if he failed again, there would be no next time. The mysterious man, filled with renewed determination, swore he wouldn't disappoint the boss. Meanwhile, in the training hall of Peridium Castle, Fergus entered, excusing himself as he approached Ghislaine. Before he could speak, a long thread of mana shot out toward a nearby sword, grabbing it and pulling it to Ghislaine. Fergus was shocked as Ghislaine caught the sword mid-air and swung it back and forth, testing its balance before declaring it suitable. Noticing Fergus, Ghislaine greeted him, and Fergus quickly bowed, apologizing for interrupting his training. He then asked Ghislaine how he had managed to perform that trick. Ghislaine, holding the sword aloft by the mana thread, explained that it was a technique called the mana thread, which allowed him to manipulate mana like a string. In his past life, Ghislaine had used the technique regularly, but at his current level, with less mana, he had to implode his core to use it at full strength. However, he had figured out how to make a single thread using minimal mana, allowing him to still employ the technique. Fergus, astonished, remarked that even though he had trained in mana for a long time, he had never seen such a technique before. Smiling, he reflected on how Ghislaine had once shown no interest in training or using mana, and now here he was, performing extraordinary feats with it. Ghislaine, sensing Fergus had a reason for his visit, asked if there was something he wanted. Fergus hesitated for a moment, then bowed deeply and thanked him for protecting the young lady, Elena. Ghislaine, surprised, asked why Fergus was thanking him when it was something he should have done anyway. Shrugging it off, Ghislaine suggested they should have a meal together. And Fergus, still smiling, agreed. A few days passed, and the festival remained paused. It was understandable, given that a guard knight had attempted to traffic the young lady. Elena, sitting at the table, was visibly frustrated and angry. She complained that no one believed her when she said Ghislaine had saved her, urging him to say something. However, Ghislaine calmly replied that it was fine. They wouldn't believe them anyway. Belinda, on the other hand, was furious, asserting that Jamal and Philip had tried to take Elena for themselves, calling them perverts. Ghislaine glanced at Elena, relieved that she was alive and that he had managed to prevent the war from breaking out. However, he knew they wouldn't give up so easily, and he couldn't stop them alone forever. This meant he needed to build a military force. As the maid excused herself to bring their food, Ghislaine sat deep in thought, considering how he needed to get more involved in politics to strengthen his position. But when his dish was placed in front of him and he opened it, he was stunned to find only a piece of bread. Shocked, he asked Belinda why they were getting dessert first. Belinda, puzzled, asked what he meant by dessert, and reminded him of their dire financial situation. Suddenly, they heard shouting outside. People were yelling for compensation, startling Ghislaine. A chubby man was leading a group, demanding that per diem compensate them for the losses they had incurred due to the festival's abrupt cancellation. The crowd rallied outside the per diem mansion, shouting for the knights to come out and accusing them of hoarding wealth. Ghislaine looked out the window in disbelief, asking what was going on. Belinda sighed, saying she knew this would happen. She explained that their country was full of merchants who relied on profits from the festival, and while the event had been enough to satisfy them last year, this year's abrupt cancellation, after just one day, had left them furious. Parko Ossel asked if the county situation was truly that bad. He knew that if nothing was done, the merchants would only become more aggressive. Turning to Fergus, he asked what the soldiers were doing and ordered him to send them down to calm the crowd. Fergus, smiling wryly, replied that they didn't have any soldiers. Confused, Ghislaine asked what he meant. Fergus explained that most of the troops had been dispatched to the Forest of Monsters for reconstruction after the orc raid. Ghislaine cursed under his breath, unable to believe the situation. Perdium, constantly at war with barbarians to the north, was now dealing with the monster-filled forest to the south. The absence of soldiers left them vulnerable. Frustrated, Ghislaine pulled Belinda aside to speak in private. He whispered, asking if she was the one managing his money, and suggesting they use some of it to calm down the merchants. Belinda, however, smiled and told him there wasn't any money left. Stunned, Ghislaine asked why not. She reminded him that the Count had cut off his allowance because he had been spending money recklessly. Realizing he was broke, Ghislaine cursed his past self for squandering his resources. Desperate, he asked Belinda to lend him money, but she simply replied that she didn't have any either. Returning to his room, Ghislaine sat by the window, cursing his situation. He wondered how they had ended up with nothing, and realized that, without even a little money, there was nothing he could do. Despite having knowledge of the future, he needed money, and fast. Ghislaine begged Island to think about whether there was anything in the estate that could help, when he suddenly heard someone rushing toward his room. Ricardo barged in, shouting his name in a panic. Ghislaine stepped away from the window and asked Ricardo what was wrong. Ricardo, breathless, shouted that there was a problem. The young Master Kane was requesting to see him. Ghislaine was surprised at the sudden news. Meanwhile, in the waiting area, Scoven lay on the ground, heavily beaten and bleeding. A man punched him hard in the face, followed by another blow to his chest. Scoven coughed up blood from the severe beating, his vision blurred from the pain. Through the haze of his fading consciousness, he managed to make out a blurry figure drawing near. As his vision slowly cleared, the sight of Scoven's battered condition sent waves of rage coursing through his barely functioning body. The anger served as a temporary anchor to awareness, pulling him back from the brink of unconsciousness. Just as the fury threatened to consume him, a voice cut through the tension-filled air, announcing Ghislaine's arrival with an unsettling casualness. From the shadows emerged an imposing presence, young Master Kane, a man whose physical stature matched his intimidating reputation. Kane's massive frame seemed to block out the light as he stepped forward, his towering height making him appear more giant than man. A mocking grin spread across his face, transforming what might have been handsome features into something menacing and cruel. The exchange that followed dripped with false friendliness as Kane addressed Ghislaine, his teasing tone a sharp contrast to the gravity of the situation. The greeting carried an undercurrent of threat, spoken with the confident air of someone who believed they held all the cards. In that moment, the air grew thick with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere recognized that this encounter would mark a turning point for everyone involved. Finally, the main character made his entrance, his dark blue eyes scanning the scene with a sharp, focused gaze. Standing in front of him was a tall figure, looming with an unsettling presence. The man's lips curled into a creepy smile, a look that hinted at something more than mere recognition. It was as though he remembered the boy's face from some forgotten encounter, or perhaps something deeper. This man was no ordinary stranger. He was the heir of Logus County, a powerful family with whom they had once forged an alliance. And he was none other than Kane Logus, the sole heir to the Logus County, and the only true friend he had during those times. Their bond, forged through years of shared experiences and challenges, flickered in their eyes as they locked gazes. It was as if in that moment, they both knew they were on the verge of some significant confrontation, like two warriors preparing to smash rice cakes together. The brief moment passed and the tension in the air was interrupted by Ghislaine's voice. Turning away from Kane, he shifted his attention to Ricardo, and asked about the situation. Ricardo was already so terrified, told him that, they responded to a report of a disturbance at the tavern, and then they found Kane there with his escort knights. And after recognizing them, he asked if the rumors about Ghislaine were true, and so Commander Scoven explained the details of the rumors to him. After that brief exchange, the tension exploded into action. Without hesitation, the main character moved with incredible speed and power, smashing the commander into a coma with a single brutal strike. The others could only stand in stunned silence, and that's exactly what happened. No embellishment, no exaggeration. Kane, with his unsettling smile still in place, turned to Ricardo, his voice low but commanding. "Tell the truth," he demanded, cutting through the silence like a blade. Ricardo hesitated, then spoke, his tone unsure as he repeated the astonishing claim. He who never even trained took down an orc with his bare hands and dealt with the traitorous escort knights all by himself. Afterwards, Kane told Ghislaine that this wouldn't have happened in the first place if he didn't lie. Ghislaine was standing completely emotionless. He knew Kane was this kind of the shit guy, as he always treated him as a subordinate, and every time he visited Perdium he always made a mess. And even after causing all that chaos, smashing the commander into a coma and single-handedly taking down the traitorous knights, no one dared to say a word against him. Why? Because he was, after all, Kane Logus, essentially the main character's subordinate, though their relationship was far more complex than that. This unspoken authority shielded him from any repercussions, leaving everyone around them in silent awe or discomfort. It was in this atmosphere of dominance and power that Ghislaine's inferiority complex took root. Watching Kane's effortless confidence, his boldness, and his ability to take control of any situation without fear, made Ghislaine feel smaller in comparison to the outside world. Kane's confidence and fearless demeanor were praised as qualities befitting a true heir, someone destined for greatness. Kane wondered that he would have charged at him with this much provocation. However, a while ago in the Logi County, someone told Kane to go and kill Ghislaine, and they told him that if he succeeds in this task, the esteemed one will support the Logus family. Kane's eyes narrowed as he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low conspiratorial tone. "So tell me," he asked with a dark curiosity, "how exactly do you plan to eliminate him?" The man he was speaking to hesitated for a moment before offering a cold, calculated reply. "We can lure Ghislaine into a duel," he suggested, his tone devoid of emotion. It can be arranged to look like a simple misunderstanding, a dispute between you two that got out of hand. Once the duel begins, we'll ensure it appears as though an accident occurred. No one will question it. He'll be out of your way, and it'll all seem like an unfortunate mishap. The weird guy looked at him and said that this is an uncommon opportunity, even for them. Kane told him that to think that he would kill his own cousin, he was already so excited about it. He further wondered that if they want to eliminate him, since something has changed about him. After some time had passed, Kane turned to Ghislaine, curiosity evident in his voice as he asked, "Why are you still standing there?" His gaze sharpened as he continued, "Since you know I'm here, you might as well bring out that thing you've prepared for me." Kane's tone was casual, yet there was an underlying expectation, as if he had been anticipating this moment for a while. Grace Lane remained still for a moment, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Kane had heard rumors earlier that the grand festival had been interrupted, throwing the once joyous celebration into a state of uncertainty. But now Ghislaine was determined to reignite the excitement. "Everyone wants to liven up the mood," Kane added. "So we better make sure they have an amazing time." Greg Lane was completely clueless, and he was obviously a nerd. He then asked him if he was talking about that. He wondered that Kane always had him prepare alcohol in women every time he came here. So he granted his request back then because he didn't want to get beaten up, but not anymore. He then remembers a cutie telling him that the Lord has cut off his support because he was wasting so much money. He suddenly realized that this was indeed the case. It was his source of money that Kane had been waiting for all along. Kane's impatience was palpable as he pressed him, saying, "You need to bring it as fast as possible. I can't wait much longer." Ghislaine, though fully aware of the urgency, responded calmly, "I will bring it to you right away. But first, there's something he must take care of. Kane have a debt that needs to be settled immediately." Everyone stood in stunned silence as Ghislaine spoke up, breaking the tension. He turned to Kane and said firmly, "You do realize, don't you, that I've been handling everything you've asked me to prepare, using my own money?" The room was filled with disbelief as his words sank in. Ghislaine continued unshaken by the reactions. "So I've decided to settle for 1,000 gold as the principal amount, plus interest." Kane told him that he has been doing that because he thanked him for being his friend. However, Gwylan got pissed. He told Kane to pay it back before he beat the hell out of him. The room was filled with silence at that point. Kane then stood up and told him that he is starting to act all bold just because he has been going easy on him. How do you perceive the shifting power dynamics between Kane and Ghislaine throughout this scene? Do you think Kane's confidence is justified? As it seems, he believes he has gotten stronger just because he spread a false rumor saying he won against Knight, and that's the reason people in North calls him an idiot when all he do is he was supposed to be the heir, but he is talking nonsense. Suddenly Kane moved forward to attack Ghislaine, but he dodged every single blow he could and smashed him on his stomach. With another punch, Kane the loser fell on his knees. Ghislaine told him that he should stop whining, and he blocked the shot. Everyone in the room firmly believed that Ghislaine was the one to blame for the situation. Kane, satisfied with how things were playing out, turned to one of his companions and casually asked, "How are my acting skills?" His friend, who had been observing the unfolding drama, gave him a grin and replied, "They're excellent. You've set the stage perfectly. Everyone here is convinced that it's Ghislaine's fault. Given the escalating tension, what do you predict will happen next between Kane and Ghislaine? Will their confrontation lead to unexpected alliances or deeper conflicts?" Kane nodded, pleased with himself. It was exactly what he had intended, to manipulate the circumstances in such a way that all eyes would fall on Ghislaine as the guilty party. His performance had been flawless, weaving subtle cues and expressions that led everyone to the conclusion he had wanted from the start. Kane suddenly realized that this was the perfect opportunity to sever the connection with the Perdium, a flower known for its tragic beauty. It represented both allure and peril, much like the situation he found himself in. He couldn't let this moment slip away. With swift determination, he pulled out a pair of striking purple gloves, their fabric shimmering ominously in the dim light. The gloves were a symbol of his readiness to engage in battle, a declaration of intent. He turned towards our boy, a look of fierce resolve etched across his face. "You think you can tarnish the dignity of nobility with your lies and deceit?" Kane shouted, his voice a mixture of disdain and anger. "You've crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." In that instant he lunged forward, the air thick with tension as the confrontation escalated. Each movement was precise and calculated, a dance of power and rage. Kane's grip tightened around the fabric of justice as he prepared to deliver a blow that would not only strike at our boy physically, but would also aim to shatter the illusions he had built around himself. Afterwards, in a fit of rage, Ghislaine slammed his gloved hand against Kane's face, the sound echoing throughout the room. With fire in his eyes, he challenged Kane to a duel, his voice steady and defiant. "You've insulted an heir in front of the people of Perdium," he declared, his tone laced with anger and determination. Kane, taken aback for just a moment, quickly regained his composure and smirked. "You're foolish enough to dig your own grave," he replied, a glint of amusement in his eyes. The crowd watched in anticipation, sensing the tension rising between the two. With a casual shrug, Kane accepted the challenge, his confidence unwavering. "Just don't regret this later," he warned. His voice dripping with mockery, the atmosphere crackled with excitement, as everyone in the room understood that this duel would not only settle their dispute, but also serve as a spectacle for the onlookers. Ghislaine then told Ricardo to bring all the merchants who are protesting in front of the castle, and to tell them that he will make them big money. The festival was suddenly cancelled as the atmosphere, which had heated up to its peak, suddenly cooled down, leaving behind some tourists who couldn't return out of regret, as they must be in a state of incomplete combustion, as they are not able to spend their money or time in such a situation. If an event were to take place to soothe them, Our boy was standing holding his sword when the announcer announced that it's a duel between young Master Kane and Ghislaine. Some shouted to bet their money on young Master Kane, while another said that damn punk's finally gonna get what he deserves. Meanwhile, on the outside, some people had stalls telling people that it's cheap. Buy one and get one free. Take a look now, and to bet their money here. Line up here. I'll bet on young Master Kane, the other dude said. Kane asked them about how dare they turn a sacred duel into a marketplace like this. Let me make this clear before we start. My sword will not stop, even if you surrender, right? And that must be what you're going after. Groxlane glanced around at the gathering crowd, sensing the anticipation in the air. Well, it seems like we have enough people gathered now, so let's begin, he announced, his voice steady yet inviting. He knew that for a proper bet to take place the atmosphere needed to be charged with excitement, but right now it felt flat. A tall guy who had been hanging around with Kane chimed in, his tone laced with skepticism. Honestly, at this rate there can't be any proper bet placed. It just doesn't feel right. His words hung in the air, prompting murmurs among the onlookers. Then a rotund man stepped forward, crossing his arms over his ample belly. Come on, no one's betting their money on Ghislaine. It's pretty clear what's going to happen here, he scoffed, a smug grin spreading across his face. With the way things are looking, it seems obvious that Ghislaine stands no chance against Kane. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted dramatically as the commander strode into the gathering. A glimmering bag of gold clutched in his hand. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. Let's change the stakes, he declared, a confident smile on his face. Instead of betting on the winner, why don't we wager on how long his lane can endure against Kane? His proposal sent riffles of surprise through the crowd, sparking a flurry of murmurs. Many hadn't considered this angle, and it added a new layer of intrigue to the unfolding event. Just then two strikingly attractive women approached, their presence turning heads. They exchanged glances before stepping up to the commander. We want to bet on Ghislaine too, one of them said, her voice smooth and melodic but filled with determination. The crowd was taken aback, their eyes widening as they recognized Elena among the two. Kane stood there, arms crossed, his frustration palpable as he scanned the crowd. He was eager to get started, the anticipation building within him like a coiled spring. Let's just do this already, he snapped, his impatience seeping into his voice. Ghislaine raised an eyebrow, his expression calm and measured. Hold on there, Kane, he replied, his tone steady. I'm older than you, so it would look a little strange if I made the first move. He wanted to maintain a sense of decorum, even in this heated moment. After a brief pause, Ghislaine took a deep breath and unsheathed his sword, its blade glinting in the sunlight. He held it firmly in one hand, its weight a comforting reminder of his training and dedication. How about this? He said, meeting Kane's intense gaze. You come at me first, let's see what you've got. Kane told him that he really think that it's too late for him to act like the older one. As the battle starts, Kane became completely insane and went ahead to attack our boy, who seems to be struggling at first. But he then dodged every possible move Kane did to attack him. The crowd was chanting for Kane and saying that he won't even endure one hit from him. Meanwhile, the white cutie turned to Elena with urgency in her eyes. We have to stop them, she insisted, her voice trembling with a mix of determination and fear. However, the dude who was accompanying Kane raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched on his face. It's already too late, he replied, shaking his head. No matter who the opponent is, the moment they decide to cross swords with Kane, they're already trapped in a web of their own making. As the opponent, overwhelmed by that immense power, will eventually be consumed by the thought that there's no chance to counterattack, and that they will use up all their energy solely on evasion. And in the end, the exhausted opponent, after only dodging for a while, will leave an opening. So that's the way Kane has always won. Meanwhile, as the battle raged on, Ghislaine continued to manage each attack with remarkable agility, evading every strike that came his way. Kane, watching with a mixture of admiration and frustration, remarked, "You're as slippery as ever." It was evident that Ghislaine's skills had indeed grown since their last encounter. He had always been adept at dodging attacks and escaping danger, a skill he had honed over the years, but now it was clear that his mastery had reached new heights. Just when it seemed like Ghislaine might maintain his winning streak, Kane executed a powerful maneuver, grabbing Ghislaine and launching him into the air with a forceful toss. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Ghislaine soared upward, his body suspended in midair, and a sense of impending doom enveloped the arena. It appeared as though it was over for him. Ghislaine wondered that. He wanted to go easy on Kane, but since he crossed the line, he won't forgive him. With an instant Ghislaine moved towards Kane and the other dude was shocked. He realized that he returned to a stable state by condensing mana into his legs and hips. Ghislaine told Kane that such ignorant swordsmanship, as he must have been thought he was the strongest just because the opponent would get scared if he showed even a little of his strength. So Ghislaine wanted to open his eyes. Kane couldn't handle all this, so he went ahead to attack Ghislaine. With remarkable agility and a repertoire of swift fluid techniques, Ghislaine expertly dodged every single attack that came his way. Each move was a testament to his honed reflexes and combat training, as he weaved effortlessly through the onslaught. In a breathtaking display of skill, he not only avoided his opponent's strikes but also seized an opportunity that seemed to appear out of nowhere. In an instant, he deftly stepped on the hilt of his adversary's sword, using it to his advantage. With a quick calculated motion, he drew his own weapon and slashed across the opponent's neck. The crowd, which had been eagerly anticipating a different outcome, fell into a stunned silence, their expressions frozen in disbelief. They talked about how Ghislaine had a lot of strength and how he improved a lot. Meanwhile, Kane realized that the wound is shallow, even though he could have made it deeper. He couldn't help but wonder if Ghislaine had performed that maneuver on purpose. The level of swordsmanship displayed was astonishing, leaving him to question how anyone could master such precision and control. It was as if Ghislaine had anticipated every move, each strike perfectly countered with a grace that was almost otherworldly. After the swift and decisive victory, Ghislaine casually threw his sword aside with a nonchalant flick of his wrist. The weapon landed with a thud on the ground, a symbol of his dismissive attitude toward the encounter. He glanced around at the crowd, a slight smirk on his face, and declared that such a glaring gap in skill wouldn't provide enough entertainment for an audience that deserved more. So he will be fighting barehanded from now on. He further told Kane that he will use this opportunity to educate him today, and with his bare knuckles. Kane was taken aback by Ghislaine's unexpected confidence, especially considering the intense battle they were in. The mention of education struck him as particularly ironic, given the context of their duel. "What are you talking about?" Kane exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief. "You think you can teach me something?" Ghislaine, however, remained unfazed by Kane's reaction. He smirked and calmly assessed the situation, acknowledging the truth in his words. "It seems I'm no match for you in swordsmanship," he admitted, his eyes glinting with mischief. "So how about I take a handicap? Let's make this interesting." Without hesitation, Ghislaine proposed a new challenge. "Fight me barehanded." The suggestion hung in the air, a bold move that hinted at his confidence in his own abilities. Kane raised an eyebrow, surprised by Ghislaine's audacity as Kane excelled in hand-to-hand combat. Ghislaine further informed him with an air of confidence that he would wager an additional 2,000 gold pieces, doubling his initial bet. This audacious claim sent ripples through the crowd, who were taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and confusion, as onlookers struggled to comprehend the situation unfolding before them. What had begun as a straightforward duel was now spiraling into something entirely different, with the two combatants stripped of their weapons and engaged in a bare-handed brawl. Spectators exchanged bewildered glances, questioning the nature of the contest. What had started as a show of skill and valor had quickly transformed into a chaotic display of raw strength and determination, leaving everyone on the edge of their seats. The weirdo thought that he dares to challenge Kane to bare-handed fight. He never thought he would see the day he would be thankful for his insanity. Afterwards, the fat guy told everyone to place additional bets, as the event is a bare-handed fight. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Everyone seemed eager to place their bets on Kane, especially given the fact that this was now a bare-handed fight. Kane's reputation as a formidable fighter only fueled their enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Kane looked at Ghislaine, a smirk playing on his lips. "You really make me laugh," he said, his tone both mocking and playful. With a defiant gesture, Kane tossed his weapon aside, signaling that he was ready to engage in the fight without any additional advantages. "Go ahead and fight without a weapon," he taunted, confident in his abilities. But then, in a surprising twist, he reached for his sword once more, brandishing it with a flourish. "I'll use this instead," he declared, his eyes gleaming with determination as he lunged forward to attack his lane. The shift from barehanded to armed combat sent shockwaves through the spectators, who could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Ghislaine chuckled, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "I expected this all along," he said, his voice steady and confident. "I guess it's time to knock some sense into you." With that, he prepared himself for the onslaught, knowing Kane would come at him with all his might. As Kane lunged forward, swinging his sword with fervor, Ghislaine moved with remarkable agility, effortlessly dodging every single attack that came his way. His movements were fluid and calculated, a dance of evasion that left Kane increasingly frustrated. Then, in a swift motion, Ghislaine seized the opportunity and delivered a sharp punch to Kane's chin. The impact sent Kane staggering backward, shock written all over his face. He couldn't fathom how this so-called idiot was able to execute such impressive maneuvers, outmatching him at every turn. As the crowd began to comprehend the unfolding drama, a wave of realization washed over them. Ghislaine might actually win this fight. Excitement crackled in the air as whispers spread among the spectators, fueling their anticipation. With a teasing smile, Ghislaine called out to Kane, "Get up. I haven't even gotten started yet." His voice was lighthearted, but the challenge was clear. This taunt only served to further provoke Kane, who, losing his cool once again, charged at Ghislaine with reckless abandon. Fueled by frustration, Kane swung wildly, desperate to land a blow. Yet to his dismay, Ghislaine evaded every single attack with an almost effortless grace. It was as if he could predict Kane's movements, slipping away from each swing and thrust with uncanny precision. In that moment, Kane realized something that had been nagging at him all along. He couldn't even look Ghislaine straight in the eyes until now. So Kane wanted to kill him, in order to protect his family Logia's future. One after another, Ghislaine unleashed a series of powerful punches aimed directly at him. Each strike landed with a force that sent shockwaves through his body, knocking him down to the ground. As he lay there disoriented, Ghislaine seized a fistful of Kane's hair, yanking his head back to force him to look up. With a sneer, he spat out his words heavy with contempt. "I pity your father for having you as a son." He paused, letting the weight of his statement sink in before continuing. Count Lagos did everything he could to assist Per Diem when it was teetering on the brink of collapse. A few years ago, Kane was engaged in a serious conversation, expressing his intentions to send more support to Per Diem. He acknowledged the deep friendship he shared with Count Per Diem, but he was also acutely aware that they were grappling with their own difficulties. "Why should we continue investing in a land that's withering away?" He questioned, the frustration evident in his voice. "It's like pouring water into a cracked bucket. No matter how much we give it, just drains away." As he recalled that moment, Kane felt a pang of worry. "It hasn't even been a week since I returned, and here I am planning to help Per Diem once more," he said, his voice filled with exasperation. He turned to his father, concern etched across his features. "Please don't go," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his tone. "Everyone is trying to stop you, and yet all you seem to do is help Perdium. Don't you see? You can't keep sacrificing everything for a place that's on the brink of collapse." That Kane's father had told him was that they were just friends, a seemingly simple declaration that felt like a weighty burden in the midst of the chaos unfolding around them. After the fierce battle that had just taken place, Ghislaine, her expression a mix of concern and determination, urged Kane to rise from the ground. However, Kane, still reeling from the intensity of the moment, simply shook his head and replied that he accepted his defeat. The atmosphere in the arena was electric, charged with a palpable mix of shock and terror as the crowd collectively gasped at Kane's unexpected admission. Their eyes darted between the two combatants, struggling to comprehend the turn of events. And just like that, in an instant that felt both agonizingly slow and astonishingly fast, Ghislaine was declared the winner. The weirdo then went and told Kane that, why did he accept defeat so early, just because he was a little bit of a disadvantage? Suddenly, Ghislaine told the weirdo that now it's time for him to do what he gotta do. He then addressed the crowd, a grin spreading across his face as he announced, "This man here is volunteering to pay for all the meat and drinks for everyone gathered tonight." Laughter rippled through the onlookers, their interest piqued by the unexpected turn of events. The man in question immediately protested, his face turning a shade of crimson, as he turned to Ghislaine. "I did not say anything like that. You should take back what you just said," he urged, his voice rising in indignation, trying to regain some control over the situation. Ghislaine, however, stood his ground, his expression unyielding. "Ah, but this is the price for losing the duel," he replied coolly, a playful glint in his eyes. Ghislaine further told him that it won't be deducted from the bet. And he told him to add the 2,000 gold to the bet they originally set at 1,000 gold. With a frightening intensity in her eyes, Ghislaine warned Kane that if he dared to run, he knew exactly what would happen to him. Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud, a threat veiled in the promise of dire consequences. After a tense moment, he turned and walked away, leaving her behind. The next day found Ghislaine in the privacy of his room, where he eagerly began examining the substantial amount of gold he had accumulated. Each gleaming coin shimmered in the light, a testament to his hard work and determination. As he rifled through the piles of riches, a thought struck him. With this much money, he could easily hire a small mercenary corps to bolster efforts. However, as he contemplated his options, the reality of the situation sank in. He understood that accumulating wealth didn't happen overnight. It required time and patience, two luxuries she didn't have. The vision of the business he had in mind began to crystallize, and he realized that if he wanted to bring it to fruition, he would have to act quickly. Suddenly, two adorable girls burst into Ghislaine's room, their playful energy filling the space. Elena, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, asked him where he was planning to spend all that money. The other girl, her friend, chimed in with a knowing smile, saying she already had an idea of where he would splurge. Amelia's birthday was just around the corner. Ghislaine's cheeks flushed slightly at the implication. It was true. He had been putting on quite the show lately, all in an effort to buy Amelia a very expensive present that would impress her. As he listened to their banter, a thought struck him. Could it be that he had unintentionally slipped into the role of a fiancé? The idea both thrilled and terrified him. He found himself pondering the nature of his feelings for Amelia and what it meant to be tied to someone in that way. His heart raced at the thought, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was ready to embrace such a commitment. Our boy was utterly stunned to hear the news. Apparently, he had a fiancée. His wide-eyed shock didn't go unnoticed, and the gray-haired girl chuckled softly, playfully advising him not to be so shy. She pointed out that they were well aware of what he was thinking. They had, after all, read his mind. And it was clear to her that he was only pretending to be clueless because he felt embarrassed. Meanwhile, the other girl rolled her eyes with a knowing smirk, likely thinking that his reaction was just another example of how much of a pervert he truly was. She then revealed that they were talking about none other than Amelia, from Rayfold County. At this, his expression shifted dramatically. His initial shock turned to something darker, as if the ground had vanished beneath him. He looked visibly shaken, even angry. This reaction seemed strange, especially considering who Amelia Rayfold was, a noble among nobles, celebrated for her genuine kindness and unwavering sense of justice. Known for treating everyone with respect, regardless of rank or status, she had earned the profound support and loyalty of the people in her territory. But that wasn't all. Amelia's legacy would take a much darker turn. She would one day incite rebellion, a fierce uprising that would cement her as the infamous Witch of the North. In an alliance with the powerful Delphine Duchy, she would ultimately deliver the crushing blow to Perdium, sealing its tragic downfall. To him, Amelia was not the noble beacon others saw. She was nothing short of a traitor. Afterwards, he turned to Belinda and asked when their father was expected to return. She shrugged, replying that he might be back in about a week, though she couldn't say for certain. As he listened, Ghislaine's expression took on a calculating edge. A week, he mused to himself, should be just enough time to carry out the plans he'd been quietly preparing. As he prepared to exit the room, his unexpected announcement about visiting Rayfold County caught Belinda completely off guard. The timing seemed peculiar to her, especially since her birthday was still months away. She couldn't understand why he would suddenly plan a visit without any special occasion. His response, delivered as he slowly turned to face her one last time, revealed his true motive. He intended to collect money from the people there. Meanwhile, on the other side of the dimly lit alley, a breathtakingly gorgeous woman knelt down gracefully, her radiant blonde hair cascading like spun gold over her shoulders. She held a pair of polished shoes in her slender hands, presenting them as though they were a precious gift, perhaps the answer to someone's deepest wish. Her delicate features, normally beautiful, now held a strange intensity as she focused on the task at hand. Yet there was something off-putting about her. A dark, useless spider crawled slowly across her pale cheek, almost as if it had chosen her as its own twisted sanctuary. She didn't seem to mind. Her gaze remained unwavering, locked on the young homeless girl in front of her. The girl's clothes were worn and tattered, practically hanging off her thin frame, and her face held a mixture of confusion and unease at the sight before her. In a gesture of kindness, the woman reached out with a pair of shoes in her outstretched hands. The mysterious benefactor was revealed to be Amelia, the beloved companion of their hero. Her eyes filled with compassion as she insisted that no person should go without shoes on her estate. If anyone were to walk barefoot on these grounds, she declared, it should be her instead. Without hesitation, Amelia turned to her attentive guards, her voice firm but gentle as she commanded them to ensure these people received immediate hospitality. Her instructions were clear. These people were to be provided with both warm food and comfortable shelter at once. Afterwards, the guards began to provide them with food and shelter, and the people couldn't stop thanking this gesture of Amelia. However, at the Rayfold County in Amelia's garden, Amelia was sitting on the chair while some dude was washing her feet. He was her escort knight called Bernif. She told him that her father, he had always demanded absolute obedience from the people of his territory. But the common people will always follow the one who keeps them warm and well-fed. Bernaf spoke with calculated intent, suggesting that her generous actions would surely win over the people's affection. He slyly pointed out how such popularity would give her an advantage in the upcoming successor competition. His manipulative words sparked an unexpected reaction. Without warning, her foot connected solidly with his face in a swift kick. Keeping her boot firmly pressed against his cheek, she demanded information about the events surrounding the finest sword of the North. My guy was enjoying his foot fetish. He then apologized and told her that it was to avoid needless attention. As if he were to stand victorious, people might start paying attention to her. As it's not the time yet to revel her claws, because his blade is hers. The weirdo then kissed her foot, finally achieving his dream. Afterward, she gently held his face, her gaze intense and almost burdened with the weight of forbidden emotions, as though she were on the brink of committing a sin. Her fingers traced his cheek, and her voice softened but carried an edge that was unmistakably firm. I've poured so much into raising you, she said, her tone almost a whisper yet heavy with meaning. I won't tolerate any sign of weakness from you. Not now, not ever. She then asked him about how things are progressing with the merchants. He told her that if she is asking about the Arctium Merchants Guild, there's no need for concern. Everything is under control. He then told her that all the materials used for the reconstruction of the Forest of Beasts outpost, which was recently half destroyed by the orc attacks in Perdium, are being purchased through their merchant guild, as in essence they are recouping all the support funds that Count Rayfold sends to Perdium each year. Furthermore, he continued, they're recruiting every soldier and knight leaving Perdium. Many of them are highly trained warriors from barbarian tribes, which makes them a valuable addition to their forces, strong, disciplined, and battle-ready. Amelia told the weirdo that, as he said before, he has to maintain the appearance of an ordinary merchant guild, instead of building his feelings for her and planning evil activities. Such a weirdo, she told him that, they cannot let their true identity be exposed until they fully built up their strength. Just then, an old geezer entered the place, moving quickly, as if with urgent news. Bernaf intercepted him, his expression hardening. The lady is resting, he said sternly. Who gave you permission to come in? The young man hesitated, then bowed slightly, his voice steady despite the tension. I apologize, but I have brought important news, he said. Ghislaine Perdium himself has arrived, and is here to see you. Amelia was not so happy to hear that. She wondered why that useless dude came here. However, the man told her that. He said that he had something to discuss about the Merchant Guild. Amelia and Bernaf lost their minds. Meanwhile in the visitor's room, our boy was sitting all dressed up like he was going to propose her. She told him that it was quite unpleasant, as he came without any prior notification. Ghislaine mentioned that her birthday was coming up soon, so he thought it would be nice to surprise her with an early gift. He explained that he had picked it up from the Merchant Guild just up ahead, adding that the fragrance was especially captivating. Ghislaine admitted that he was so impressed by the flowers that he planned to purchase them exclusively from that merchant in the future. With a weird look on her face, she said that she doesn't understand what he is trying to say. After that, she stood up and told him that now that he has received his gift, she will be off. She said her farewell and tries to get away. Suddenly, Ghislaine called out her name, a mischievous glint flashing in his eyes as he motioned for her to sit down. His voice held an unexpected firmness, and she felt an unfamiliar weight in the air, a heavy pressure radiating from him that made her pause. She couldn't help but marvel at the change in him. This was the same Ghislaine who once used to squirm nervously, barely able to string a sentence together whenever he stood before her. Now though, there was an air of quiet confidence about him that both intrigued and unsettled her. He then told her that they should get straight to the point, that he needs some money right now, as he wants 10,000 gold. She then said that visiting out of nowhere and asking for such a large sum from his fiancée, she then asked if she should take it as the will of Count Perdue. He told her that his father had nothing to do with this, and that she should just give it to him. He then asked her, "You're not planning to marry me, are you?" His tone was light, but there was a serious undertone to his question. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms as he considered her reaction. And not only that, he literally dropped the tea on the ground. He further said that take that escort knight for example. If you were to become the lord of this land, marrying someone like him might become more feasible. But before that happens, you need to be cautious. If word about your secret efforts to build up your power spreads in Rayfold, where the fight for succession is fierce, it could put you in serious danger. Just as he finished speaking, a sudden commotion interrupted their conversation. The useless cat, who had been lounging lazily nearby, sprang into action, launching itself at our hero with unexpected ferocity. He barely dodged the playful attack, shaking his head in exasperation at the creature's antics. Amelia, shrouded in a dark aura that seemed to amplify the tension in the room, turned to him sharply. "You shouldn't say things like that, not even as a joke," she admonished, her voice low and firm. There was an intensity in her gaze that made it clear she was serious, and he felt a chill run down his spine. He nodded, acknowledging her concern with a serious expression. "I'll keep that a secret for now," he promised, his tone shifting to match the gravity of the moment. "But I have to warn you, I might not keep those words to myself if I leave this room empty-handed. My silence comes with a price, and I can't afford to risk everything without some assurance." As the tension in the room hung thick like fog, Amelia decided it was time to summon help. She called for Burnham, and a moment later he entered the room with confident stride. "It's been a while, Ghislaine," Burnham said, his voice warm but laced with a hint of curiosity. Ghislaine instantly recognized him as the loyal companion who had always been by Amelia's side, a figure often overlooked but undeniably formidable. This was no ordinary man. He was a skilled warrior whose potential rivaled that of the finest swords of the North in their prime. Ghislaine felt a mix of respect and wariness as he observed Burnham. The weight of their situation pressed down on him, intensifying his next words. "Listen, if I die here today, a war may erupt, and I need you to understand the implications. This isn't just about our lives, it's about the balance of power in the entire region. If you're sure you can handle that, then we can proceed." Amelia stepped forward and said that they can handle this, Ghislaine. She then paused for a moment, assessing the situation, before continuing with a cold edge in her tone. A sudden ruffian barged in, causing chaos and confusion, and was swiftly eliminated by the hand of the escort knight. That's the story the world will hear about his demise. She then turned to her knight, her expression resolute. "Finish it," she commanded, her voice sharp as she ordered him to kill Ghislaine. The knight, who had been prepared for this moment, drew his sword with a swift motion. At that moment our boy Ghislaine realized that if that's how they wanted to play this dangerous game, then he had no choice but to get a little more serious. Amelia's puppet had glowing red eyes, seeing Ghislaine that he might have enjoyed her melons before him. The purple aura around him was the clarification of his prominent strength as he was walking towards Ghislaine. However, Ghislaine was also holding onto his sword, just in case they tried to cut his sausage. As Ghislaine stood transfixed, staring into the depths of the knight's eyes, an unsettling sensation washed over him. It was as if a shadow had flitted past him, a mere whisper of movement that sent a shiver down his spine. He barely had time to process the feeling when in the blink of an eye, another masked figure emerged from the darkness behind him. This was no ordinary foe. It was a slave king, cloaked in the same menacing disguise, and he was advancing with lethal intent to kill Ghislaine. However, just as the masked attacker lunged forward with his blade, Ghislaine reacted in a flash, executing a perfectly timed backflip. The sword of the deranged adversary missed him by mere inches, plunging deep into the chair he'd been seated in moments before. Greenland landed lightly on his feet, and without wasting a second, delivered a fierce kick straight to the man's stomach. The impact was brutally powerful that the attacker's eyes bulged in shock as he felt every rib crack, jolting painfully through his body till his ass. The force of Greytag didn't just stop there, it hurled the masked assailant across the room, sending him crashing through the window with a shattering explosion of glass. Meanwhile, the evil witch Amelia and her puppet couldn't believe what was happening. They thought he must be a kindergarten boy with fake skills. Afterward, Ghislaine brushed off the attack with a mocking sneer. An assassin striking under the guise of politeness, he scoffed. "Is this the level of hospitality you offer?" He directed his anger toward the knight, the so-called lord of these clowns, who stood poised with a sword drawn and aimed directly at him, the tip glinting ominously in the low light. With a surge of fierce determination, Ghislaine advanced his own blade at the ready. The clang of steel against steel filled the room as their swords collided, each strike resonating with the force of their animosity. Between their exchanges, Ghislaine shot a contemptuous glance at his opponent. "Tell me," he challenged, "are there no manners in Rapul?" The knight's voice was cold as he replied, "My deepest apologies, but the first to act without respect was you. You barged in, unannounced, upsetting Lady Amelia. For someone like that, courtesy is undeserved." With that, the knight shifted his stance, gripping his sword tightly in one hand, while his other hand shot forward in a quick, unexpected strike toward Ghislaine. But Ghislaine's reflexes kicked in. He sidestepped with an agility so fluid and fast, he almost seemed to disappear for a split second, evading the knight's grasp as if he were a martial artist from a far eastern land. Seizing the opening, Ghislaine performed a quick maneuver, twisting around the knight and using his momentum to shove him backward. The knight staggered, momentarily thrown off balance. The knight wondered that he has heard that he is all arrogant with no real skill, but it seems like he is not a complete newbie. Our boy Ghislaine was standing like he was about to destroy the knight into 1,000 pieces. Suddenly, the evil witch Amelia told the knight that he is just playing around with a clown like him. He is taking him seriously for no reason, with an expression of some kind of dog-evil face. Lady Amelia fixed Ghislaine with a look that bordered on a sneer. "Hurry up and bring me that lunatic's head already," she demanded, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you're really my rice cake lover and my sword, prove it." At her words, the knight's demeanor shifted, his face darkened, a shadow crossing his features as he stood poised, as if about to unleash something devastating upon Ghislaine. With an icy calm, he raised his sword, casting a sidelong glance at her. "I won't disappoint you, my lady," he said, his voice edged with chilling resolve. Turning back to Ghislaine, he squared his shoulders and leveled his sword. "So shall we begin this circuses of yours?" Ghislaine asked him that how did a mere escort knight dare to give him orders. As they both got ready in their stances, the knight told him that it's protection, but if he prefer then he will do as he wish. Our boy was holding his sword ready. Just then the knight moved to attack him, but Ghislaine again dodged it as he moved to the side. Ghislaine realized that this guy is fast. The two clashed with unrestrained ferocity, each strike landing with the force of their mutual disdain. Their swords met again and again, ringing through the air in a chaotic symphony, as they fought like wild maniacs, neither giving an inch. Guy Lane, far from backing down, matched the knight's intensity, his every move sharp and calculated. Dodging a fierce swing, Ghislaine twisted to the side, using the momentum to counterattack. His blade sliced dangerously close to the knight, who only barely managed to deflect it. Meanwhile, Amelia kept on wondering how someone is called a clown, able to fight in equal terms with someone like Bernard. Her eyes were focused on them as if something was about to happen. In a tense moment, Ghislaine blocked a razor-sharp strike from the knight, countering swiftly with his own slash. But the knight, moving with almost supernatural reflexes, deflected it with his arm, retaliating with a vicious swing. Ghislaine's eyes narrowed, recognizing the knight's familiar pattern. He'd seen this move before. Anticipating the strike, Ghislaine rolled to the side, aiming to catch the knight off guard and take him down. But then a sinister purple aura flared up around the knight, casting an eerie glow. "It won't work twice," the knight sneered, his voice laced with confidence. Before Ghislaine could react, the knight's aura-fueled strength surged, and he delivered a brutal blow that sent Ghislaine crashing to the ground. The impact was bone-shattering, leaving Ghislaine sprawled in agony, feeling as though every bone in his body had been broken by the sheer force. And just then, the knight went ahead with his sword to attack him, but Ghislaine again dodged it with his leg and tried to do the same move again. And this time, he was successful. He threw the knight back. Ghislaine then asked him if he was using mana to withstand it. The knight then stood up and told him that he is not quite what the rumors say, as he guesses he never really knew someone until he fights them themselves, as his swordsmanship seems more like something learned through real combat rather than systematic training. He then asked him if he picked it up naturally by fighting barbarian tribes so often. Afterward, the knight cast his sword aside with a firm, deliberate motion, letting it fall heavily onto the ground. Reaching for another blade strapped to his side, he unsheathed it with a slow, almost reverent precision, the metal gleaming sharply in the dim light. He turned to Ghislaine, his gaze steely and unyielding. "Those techniques of yours might be effective amidst the frenzy of a chaotic battlefield," he began, his voice low and measured, yet carrying an unmistakable tone of finality. "But here and now, they mean nothing. They won't work on me. This ends here, once and for all." Ghislaine expected that it's bit too much, as his precise thrusts to narrow gaps and relentless stabs aimed at him, with both distance and timing, as at close range, the difference in physical build makes it hard to overpower him with technique alone. As he guesses, he was never someone he should have picked a fight with to begin with. Our boy doesn't have time for this either. With a swift movement, our boy drew a mysterious, shimmering rod from his arm. In his grasp it transformed, lengthening and reshaping itself into what appeared to be a formidable enchanted rod. The knight's eyes narrowed as he studied it, realizing it was infused with mana raw pulsing energy woven into delicate thread-like structures along its length. Without a moment's hesitation, Ghislaine lunged forward, his expression fiercely as he raised the enchanted rod to grab the sword, which was laying behind the knight. With a swift motion, he grabbed the sword and struck on the back of the head, which struck heavily on him. And then with a wild, almost acrobatic motion, he sprang up and delivered a sharp knee strike directly to the knight's face, catching him completely off guard. The knight staggered back, momentarily dazed, his mind racing to grasp Ghislaine's unpredictable tactics. He wondered what on earth he was up to, his movements shifting from calculated strikes to wild, unorthodox attacks that left him struggling to anticipate his next move. Amelia's voice rang out, desperate and frantic as she shouted for him, her concern echoing across the battlefield. But Ghislaine paid his no heed, focusing solely on the knight as he launched himself into the air, his enchanted rod poised to strike down with deadly intent. In a split second, just as the blow was about to land, the knight intercepted it with his sword, meeting Ghislaine's power head-on. With a fierce shove, he forced Ghislaine to the side, momentarily disrupting his momentum. Turning to Amelia, the knight's voice was firm. "Leave now, as he can't guarantee her safety from here on out." He raised his sword, pointing it directly at Ghislaine, determination hardening his gaze, as he will fight with everything he has from now on. But Ghislaine only smiled, calm and unruffled, as if the clash had stirred something deep within him. Finally, he said, his voice laced with an almost amused satisfaction, "I found a worthy opponent after such a long time." Amelia, who was clutching her beloved cat tightly against her chest, stormed towards the entrance as her face twisted in fury over Ghislaine's shameless attempt to humiliate her. Yet beneath her glare, her expression softened, hinting at something more than just anger. Amelia's speed was so fast that it could be compared to Usain Bolt at this point. She pondered whether the leak of her merchant guild information could be attributed to the useless Ghislaine, the one who had shared these details with the madman. Amelia tried to dismiss this thought, convinced that Ghislaine couldn't possibly possess such intimate knowledge. Amelia's frustration was palpable, as she couldn't stop contemplating the rumors surrounding Ghislaine's exploits, his alleged slaying of orcs, his valiant protection of his younger sibling from assassins, and his triumph over the heir of Loge. Judging from Ghislaine's notorious past, Amelia doubted that these accounts were mere exaggerations or coincidences. Amelia's eyes burned with the boiling blood of hatred as she neared the end of the corridor, wondering about the guards she had posted there. As she looked around, she saw the guards lying on the floor, having been defeated by a mysterious person in a black coat standing in the middle. As the person turned her head towards Amelia, her striking white hair caught the light, and her eyes glowed with a faint purple aura. It was a beautiful, yet intimidating sight. "It's been a while," the woman said smoothly, her voice carrying a chilling familiarity. Amelia's eyes widened in recognition. She knew exactly who stood before her. This was none other than the servant from Perdium, a figure she'd hoped to never see again. Gathering her composure, Amelia demanded that she know why she was here. But the woman merely smirked and replied curtly, "Keep quiet." In the next instant, before Amelia could react, the woman disappeared from her sight, only to reappear behind her. A cold blade pressed against Amelia's neck, sharp and unwavering. However, Amelia was in a state of shock, her wide eyes blinking. She remained clueless about what was happening. The sharp knife pressed against her neck. The girl told Amelia that she still had that ugly-looking spider all over her lips, and imagined Goslan just kissing the spider in the future. The person smiled and further told Amelia that it was during the engagement ceremony that she remembered overhearing a conversation between Count Rayfold and their lord. She then pointed out that her brothers had teased her for having such creepy spiders around, so she had raised spiders herself and got revenge. The girl then recounted a flashback from Amelia's childhood, when she had used the spiders to scare her brothers and other children around, being like a little devil. Back in the present, the girl tightly placed the edge of the knife against Amelia's face, wondering if it was to overcome her trauma or display a self-affirmation. And then she just threw the spider off Amelia's face, telling her that it didn't suit her, and that she looked much prettier without it. As the spider fell to the floor, the person crushed it without any hesitation, as if smashing a peanut. Afterwards, she asked Amelia for her cooperation. Meanwhile, on the other side, Ghislaine and the knight were still engaged in battle, standing opposite to each other. However, Ghislaine remained calm as he felt the heaviness in the air, sensing an overwhelming amount of mana around the knight. The knight's eyes were completely glowing red, with a blue aura surrounding him, as he continued to point his sword towards Ghislaine. The knight smirked, making a sly comment to Ghislaine, suggesting that he was quite the entertaining opponent. Ghislaine found the knight's remark insulting, thinking it was exactly the kind of thing a lowly mercenary would say. And yet, here was this knight boldly calling himself a noble, just like his evil lady. To Ghislaine, this was infuriating. Without missing a beat, Ghislaine responded, firmly telling the knight that he was of noble blood as well. He questioned if the knight truly believed that such an insult was appropriate for a mere bodyguard, implying that the knight's arrogance was misplaced. Suddenly, the tension in the room spiked, and an intense energy filled the air. Without any further warning, the knight charged forward, shouting Ghislaine's name as he closed in. Their swords clashed with a loud metallic ring. The knight's face twisted into a fierce, menacing expression as he commanded Ghislaine not to bring shame upon the noble name. With that, he unleashed a rapid and powerful series of explosive attacks, each one fiercer than the last. Grelin, sensing the knight's fierce skill, began expertly evading each strike. Undaunted, the knight pressed the assault, advancing with every attack. Ghislaine had reached his limit and struck the knight's sword, briefly pushing his hand back, then tried to counterattack. However, the knight's reflexes proved superior, using his blade to block Ghislaine's attack and riposte, sending Ghislaine reeling. In that moment, fear flickered in Ghislaine's eyes, as the knight declared this to be his final strike. Before unleashing the devastating blow, the knight was frozen in shock, his eyes wide as if they might pop out of his head. He realized that Ghislaine had cleverly used his shoulder to deflect the blade, allowing the injury to only graze the surface instead of dealing a fatal blow. But before he could fully process this, Ghislaine closed in, launching a swift and fierce attack with his sword. Admiring Ghislaine's tenacity, the knight noted how his opponent hadn't let his guard down for even a moment, refusing to show any hint of vulnerability. Determined to regain control, the knight shifted his stance and quickly changed tactics. In one fluid motion, he deflected Ghislaine's strike with a sharp, calculated swing of his sword to the right, countering with newfound precision. In the same fluid motion, he delivered a powerful kick to Ghislaine's side, smirking as he sensed the contrast between himself, a disciplined warrior, and a man who swung his sword simply for the thrill of the fight. The impact of the kick was tremendous, sending Ghislaine hurtling backward, his body skidding across the ground. Ghislaine stood his ground, but his condition was not looking good. He was out of breath, and the injury was causing him pain. Yet he found the situation somewhat entertaining. The knight's overwhelming speed, reach, and successive attacks allowed him to control the flow of the fight. Any attempt by Ghislaine at a close-range counterattack through grappling was instantly nullified. The knight twisted his sword with remarkable skill, creating the illusion that their blades were locked together, making Ghislaine feel as though they were inseparable. In that tense moment, Ghislaine came to a harsh realization. He simply couldn't match the knight's raw strength with the mana reserves he currently had. His power, as it stood at that moment, was insufficient to counter the knight's overwhelming force. But then an idea struck him. He suddenly remembered a critical aspect of his abilities that he had been overlooking, his unique mana cultivation technique. Determined not to back down, Ghislaine gripped his sword tightly, centering his focus. With newfound resolve, he summoned his hidden strength and unleashed his third core. In an instant, a radiant pink aura enveloped him, casting a warm, glowing light throughout the room and illuminating the darkness of their fierce battle. Ghislaine moved with a newfound speed and precision, his body feeling almost as if it were being guided by an instinct beyond his own. He surged forward, his attacks becoming a blur as he closed in on the knight. Each strike collided fiercely against the knight's blade, resulting in a dazzling display of sparks and energy that illuminated the space around them. Then, with a powerful and decisive blow, Ghislaine managed to knock the knight's sword to the side, leaving his opponent momentarily stunned and struggling to regain his composure. The sudden shift in momentum shocked the knight, who hadn't anticipated such a rapid turn in the battle. The knight stared in disbelief. wondering how Ghislaine could summon such explosive mana in the heat of combat. Seizing the opportunity, Ghislaine advanced, his sword poised and unwavering, its tip now resting just above the knight's forehead, ready to end the fight. But suddenly, a voice rang out, urging Ghislaine to stop. It was the girl who had been holding Amelia captive. Her voice trembled, and her expression softened as she stepped forward. Beside her, Amelia stood with tears glistening in her eyes, her face full of desperation. She pleaded with Ghislaine, begging him to take the 10,000 gold coins and leave her sight forever. Ghislaine, worn out from the intense battle, looked at Amelia with a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. He replied dryly that things would have gone much smoother if she had just handed over the money, when he'd asked politely in the first place. Meanwhile, the knight, breathing heavily, was struggling to keep his balance. Blood trickled from a fresh wound on his forehead, and his once proud expression was replaced by a look of utter defeat. Gone was the arrogance he had shown just moments before. The girl holding Amelia captive then asked Grade if he was really just calling this a lover's fight over a difference of opinion. However, Ghislaine simply told her that was exactly what it was, a couple's dispute. Ghislaine then moved towards Amelia, informing her that he had some bad news. With an evil look on his face, he told Amelia that the fee had just increased to 20,000 gold. As the scene unfolds, the corridor is littered with the lifeless bodies of guards. The wall previously broken by Ghislaine stands as a silent witness to the unfolding events. Suddenly, a flower pot crashes to the floor, its shattered remains scattered across the ground. Amelia's mischievous cat, lurking beneath a nearby sofa, observes the scene with its watchful gaze. The perpetrator of this act is none other than Amelia herself, standing alongside her knight, who appears ashamed and disoriented, lost in the midst of chaos. Turning his head downward, the knight continued apologizing for the defeat, explaining to Amelia that Ghislaine proved to be a much stronger opponent than the rumors had suggested. He admitted it was his mistake not to have thoroughly examined Ghislaine in advance. The knight further revealed that, in an instant, Ghislaine had unleashed a mana level that surpassed even that of a high-ranking knight. Meanwhile, an evil look crossed Amelia's face, her shiny red eyes clearly visible. She highlighted that Ghislaine had undergone a significant change. Afterward, the knight leaned forward and suggested to Amelia that they report the incident to Watch's Delphine's family. Hearing this, Amelia promptly slapped the knight, knocking the sense out of him. Grabbing him by the collar, Amelia sternly warned the knight to watch his mouth, questioning if he had any idea how truly terrifying Duke Delphine could be. She made it clear that if today's events were to come to light, their heads would be the ones to roll. Afterwards, Amelia revealed to the knight that the reason she had allied with Duke Delphine was because they had made a secret pact. She explained that in exchange for helping her get rid of Peridium, the Duke had promised to support Plan for Rebellion. Amelia made it clear that if this were to be exposed, her siblings would undoubtedly have her killed. Amelia then grew extremely enraged, telling the knight that if they were to uncover the secrets within the guild, they could find out about this pact. She emphasized that they must find a way to eliminate Ghislaine, no matter the cost. The knight responded that he understood what she was trying to say. Amelia then inquired about Ghislaine's condition. The knight informed her that Ghislaine had multiple cuts all over his body and a large wound on his shoulder. Furthermore, the knight added that since Ghislaine had just used an immense amount of mana, he would not be at his best for a while. With a cold-blooded look in his eyes, the knight then told Amelia that they could not rely on the territory's knights if they wanted to leave no trace. Amelia then moved towards a map that was placed on a nearby table, informing the knight that she knew everything. She then gave him a side-eye look, similar to the one many KFC workers often give, and told him about the reason they have those they had raised for moments like this. The knight grew visibly uncomfortable and shocked, realizing that Amelia could be referring to someone he knows. Amelia called them the wild felines and placed a bookmark on a location on the map, stating that the war orphans, those without lineage and those without status should be sent there. Amelia then instructed the knight to gather around a dozen skilled in mana, describing them as looking scary like an Annabelle doll. The knight recognized that the valley marked by the bookmark was the only direct path to Peridium from the Rayfold territory. It was a rarely visited location with narrow terrain, making it the perfect place to handle things quietly. With a grave expression, the knight promised Amelia that he would ensure they were fully prepared. Despite the earlier humiliation she had faced, Amelia's ego had not subsided. She glowed with a dark red aura, determined to make Ghislaine pay the price for the humiliation he had caused her. Meanwhile, Ghislaine was in a moving cart, tending to his wounds and applying bandages. Narrowing his eyes, he uttered Amelia's name. The old man and the young girl were also present in the cart with Ghislaine. The old man asked Ghislaine if he was all right. Ghislaine reassured him, saying that he should not worry, as the wounds were not that serious. However, Ghislaine knew that the wound, though reckless, was not as deep as it could have been. He tried moving his arm around, testing its mobility. From inside the cart, Ghislaine contemplated that the 20,000 gold he had received from Amelia was more than enough as initial capital to rebuild his territory. So, this was like saving years' worth of time. He further wonders about how it would have been nice to kill Amelia Oswell, but he could not have avoided territorial conflict. Ghislaine knew he could not let his impulsive emotions put his territory in danger. He put his jacket back on. He realized that Peridium was already struggling to defend itself against the barbarians, so withdrawing now was the best move. However, he understood that the secrets he held about the Artium Guild would make it very difficult for them to act. Tightening his grip on his collar, Ghislaine decided he would fully take advantage of Amelia this time. His eyes glowed with a determined blue hue, signaling his seriousness. However, the young girl sitting in front of him remained clueless. She then asked Ghislaine if the situation had turned out as he had instructed. She clarified that he had told her to subdue the guards if she heard fighting inside and to take Amelia hostage after she left. Ghislaine seemed unsure, asking if that had indeed been the plan or not. He then mentioned that he thought he had instructed Elder Fergus to handle it. Suddenly, Ghislaine was stunned, as if he had received an electric shock. He started holding his mouth, leaving the old man and the young girl extremely worried, unsure of what was happening. Ghislaine removed his hand from his mouth, noticing blood on his palms. He wondered if this was a consequence of opening his third core. Ghislaine contemplated that it was not as serious as last time, but if this happened every time he used his power, it would pose a problem. He realized he needed to find a way to quickly secure and increase his mana. Alinda then took Ghisline's hand. Confused, Ghislaine watched as Alinda placed 2 of her fingers beside his wrist. She then produced a sharp-looking object from her hand, remarking that her mana flow was in disarray. Without warning, Alinda began repeatedly tapping the tip of the sharp object against Ghislaine's palm. Ghislaine looked as though he had been building in a fart for ages. Suddenly, he expelled a large plume of smoke from his mouth. Looking at his palm, he realized that his stagnant mana path has been cleared a little. He then wondered that this kind of treatment is only possible with a deep compression of mana. As Ghislaine studied Belinda with his sharp blue eyes, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of curiosity. The fact that Belinda had mentioned his mother was the one who brought her here made it clear to him that she wasn't just an ordinary servant. There was an air of mystery about her, something that didn't quite fit with the typical role of head servant in a quiet rural estate like his. He found himself wondering about her true identity. Who was she really, and why was someone with her level of skill and competence working in such an obscure position? Ghislaine couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He had seen enough in his life to recognize that someone like Belinda, with her poised demeanor and sharp instincts, was not meant for a simple life of domestic work. He suspected she had been trained for far more, and that kind of talent and expertise wasn't something he could ignore, especially given the current threats against him. With Amelia and her dangerous knight actively plotting against him, Ghislaine knew he needed capable allies by his side. As the cart sped along, Belinda told Ghislaine that she trusted him and would help him without hesitation, whatever he chose to do. She then asked him why he had taken such a large sum of money from Amelia. Ghislaine was silent for a moment before explaining that there was something he needed to spend money on, and Amelia was the only one close by with that much wealth. The old man and Belinda were stunned, likely wondering what Ghislaine could be planning. Belinda then started shouting at him, saying he had caused this disaster and even got injured, all for that reason. She worried that if this reached Count Rafal's ears, it would be a huge problem. Ghislaine reassured her that Amelia would never tell his father about this. With a smile, Ghislaine asked Belinda if she didn't trust him. Belinda's anger was barely concealed, as she told him that she did trust him, and that at least he should tell the person risking everything with him what the money would be used for. Suddenly, Ghislaine revealed that the money would be used for the Beast Forest. Hearing this, Belinda was so shocked that couldn't even blink her eyes. With a suspenseful way, Ghislaine tells everyone that they are going to develop the Beast Forest. The old man Fergus started shouting in terror upon hearing Ghislaine's plan for the Beast Forest. He told Ghislaine that it had been attempted to develop that forest since his great-grandfather's era, but to no avail. Ghislaine then asked Fergus about what had happened with the request he had made before entering the castle. Fergus looked terrified, unable to stop sweating. He then revealed that the person Ghislaine had asked him to find was at the location Ghislaine had mentioned. Fergus tried to elaborate on their condition, but Ghislaine interrupted, saying that as long as they were alive, that's what mattered, and he was heading there now. Belinda told them that they needed to return to the territory, as in his current condition, Ghislaine should not be wandering around. Ghislaine then asked Belinda if she thought Amelia would just let them leave after what had happened. He knew that due to her personality, Amelia would try to kill him to silence him. Belinda went into a frenzy, saying she was good at fighting and that Fergus was a knight as well. She declared that if things went wrong, she could that witch, Amelia. Ghislaine told her that it was reassuring, but that was not her role, as it was a different field. He then revealed to them that they needed a charge captain, and that they were now going to see that person. Afterward, they reached a dilapidated area with wooden houses. Belinda commented that the residence they had arrived at was completely in ruins. However, Ghislaine knew this was the right place. Suddenly, the door opened and an elderly man with white hair walked out, looking like he should have been living in a retirement home. With a frightening expression, the man asked who was there. Except Ghislaine seemed scared and stunned. Belinda whispered to Ghislaine, questioning if this frail-looking man was truly the person he had asked to find, specifically a captain. She thought this sick-looking individual could not possibly be someone who could lead in battle. However, Ghislaine assured Belinda that this was the right person. The elderly man looked at them with his lifeless eyes and tried to close the door, dismissing them as bored aristocrats whose time he did not want to waste. Quickly, Ghislaine called out to the man, telling him to wait. He introduced himself as Ghislaine, the captains of the Ratatosk Mercenary group. Hearing this, the man froze, his gaze fixed on Ghislaine's shining blue eyes. As the man turned around, Garolin told him that he had missed him greatly. The 2 men of Ghislaine's squad, Fergus and the third wheeler, were utterly astonished. The older man's thoughts drifted to memories of the Ratatosk Mercenary squad, while his fellow guy recognized it as something familiar, a legendary group that only accepted members who had mastered multiple weapons. Though the squad no longer existed, their legendary courage meant that every knight across different countries had encountered their name at least once, with their renowned leader being Gillian, who was known as the Homeless Lord of Kings. When Ghislaine extended his hand, his voice calm and steady, as he explained the purpose of his meeting with Gillian. The moment took an unexpected turn. Without warning, an axe came hurtling through the air at an incredible speed. It sliced through the atmosphere with a menacing whistle, narrowly missing him by mere inches. The blade tore through the fabric of his clothes, leaving a jagged rit before embedding itself firmly in the ground just behind him. Sudden action left Fergus, Belinda, and their other companion completely stunned at what they had just witnessed. Following the scene, Gillian, revealing himself as the one who had thrown the weapon as he stretched out his muscular arm to showcase his impressive strength, while declaring that they were already aware of his identity. Gillian's massive body stood before them like an intimidating beast, while Fergus and their third wheeler positioned themselves protectively in front of Ghislaine and Belinda, who appeared prepared to demonstrate some magical abilities. Through his thick, ugly-looking facial hair, Gillian peered at them with one eye and questioned their purpose for being there. Gillian remained expressionless as he stood next to Belinda, who firmly gripped her weapon and cautioned him to maintain his distance, expressing concern about Gillian's apparently unstable mental state. The atmosphere in the room changed noticeably when Gillian, with an uncharacteristic seriousness, suddenly uttered the words about eternal punishment. His tone carried a weight that seemed to echo in the silence that followed, instantly drawing Gillian's attention. Gillian then told him that he knows a way on how to cure his daughter's incurable. Everyone stared at him, as he was the star of the show. After revealing this crucial information, Ghislaine inquired whether Gillian was now willing to discuss the matter further. He described the severe symptoms plaguing Gillian's daughter, which included intense fever, coughing up blood, and mysterious red marks that resembled blooming flower petals across her skin. This devastating condition, known as eternal punishment, earned its name because its victims experienced torment similar to prisoners enduring endless torture. Without warning, Gillian's daughter began screaming in agony, her entire body and surroundings becoming drenched in blood as the disease overwhelmed her. Gillian rushed to his daughter's side in desperation, attempting to soothe her while expressing disbelief at this sudden attack. Meanwhile, Ghislaine and his companions remained in the room, observing the heartbreaking scene as the young girl continued writhing and screaming in excruciating pain. Despite Gillian's attempts to comfort her and repeatedly calling her name while holding her close, the situation remained dire. Throughout this emotional scene, Ghislaine maintained his position at the back of the room, silently witnessing the tragic unfold. Ghislaine remained motionless, aware that there was still time to administer treatment. He recalled how in his previous life, his attempts to recruit Gillian had failed because the warrior had already passed away, having taken his own life after losing his daughter and subsequently abandoning all hope. Observing the deteriorating condition of their residence, Ghislaine realized that Gillian had depleted his entire fortune attempting to cure his daughter, leaving only his collection of weapons as remaining possessions. Rachel's renewed screams of agony pierced the air as she expressed her desperate wish to die, rather than endure more suffering, while her father watched helplessly, his heart breaking at his daughter's torment. Moving by this tragic scene, Ghislaine began removing his jacket, determined that they couldn't afford to wait any longer before beginning treatment. However, as he prepared to help, Belinda placed her hand on his shoulder. She warned him to step back. Her expression is as that of a McDonald's worker when we asked for extra cup of coffee. Belinda expressed her skepticism, noting that if even skilled priests had failed to cure what they believed was a divine punishment, this situation couldn't be resolved through forceful intervention. She questioned what Ghislaine intended to do about such a seemingly hopeless condition. However, demonstrating his characteristic recklessness, Ghislaine brushed aside her concerns, firmly declaring his ability to heal Rachel. His bald assertion caused Belinda to react with complete disbelief, wondering what kind of outrageous action he was planning to take. After turning around, he asked Belinda if she trusted him or not. Belinda stayed quiet as she got caught at that moment. Ghislaine handed Belinda a piece of paper and instructed her to all the medicinal herbs listed without missing a single one. Belinda's reaction was one of complete shock, her eyes widening so dramatically it seemed her pupils might pop out at any moment. Ghislaine understood that for mercenaries without a permanent home, knowledge was essential for survival. Sitting down with his bag of herds, he contemplated the eternal punishment and incurable disease for now, but one he knew would eventually have an effective treatment. As he carefully arranged the ingredients on the table, he recalled the preparation method with precise detail. However, he recognized the significant challenge. The recipe required an incredibly expensive component, pulling out a stunning flower called the Fairy Blessing. Its vibrant purple aura irradiated brilliantly. Methodically, he began chopping the Fairy Blessing, explaining his process of grinding the herbs together, pressing them into a jar, adding spirits, and then shaking the mixture thoroughly before allowing it to rest. His companions watched intently, observing what seemed like the work of a genius scientist. As he shook the jar, it glowed with a purple light. He added the remaining herbs and continued stirring. Finally, he presented Gillian with a small tube-like bottle containing the potion, which Gillian examined carefully with his one eye. Following Ghislaine's instructions, Gillian gently held Rachel like a small child and carefully administered the potion. After consuming the liquid, Rachel lay peacefully, her tears vanishing, signaling a potential miraculous recovery. Rachel was sleeping peacefully as there were tears beside her eyes. An absolute silence filled the room as Gillian hung his head low, with Ghislaine and the others standing behind him, any sign of change. Fergus and Belinda stared in disbelief as Rachel's mysterious spots began fading away. Fergus shouted at Rachel, questioning whether the medicine was genuinely working, or if they were experiencing some kind of hallucination. However, Rachel remained unresponsive. Gillian appeared deeply distressed, but Ghislaine reassured him that the treatment seemed to be functioning remarkably well. Gillian turned to Ghislaine with intense anger, demanding an explanation for how this could be possible when even sacred powers had failed to heal her. Ghislaine explained that previously sacred powers merely stimulate the body's natural healing ability, which differ significantly from providing a fundamental cure. Overwhelmed with emotion, Gillian's hands trembled uncontrollably as he sought confirmation. Dropping to his knees and clutching Ghislaine's body, he desperately asked if his daughter could truly be saved. With a sharp, confident expression, Ghislaine assured him that Rachel would definitely recover within 1 or 2 months. The revelation left Gillian utterly speechless, his mouth and eyes wide open in pure shock. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he bowed before Ghislaine, asking about what he desired from him, as if he came all this way. He must want something, offering everything he had left his seemingly useless body. In a moment of extreme desperation, Gillian proclaimed he would become anything Ghislaine desired, and dog, a slave, anything at all. However, Gillian simply extended his hand and stated that he didn't want a slave, but instead needed Gillian, the true leader of the legendary Ratatoskar mercenary squad. As Gillian studied Ghislaine's face, he found himself captivated and wondering about the profound depth and mysterious intentions hidden within his eyes. In a dramatic moment, Gillian rose to his feet, gripping the end of his long hair. With a sudden, unexpected movement, he pulled out an axe and slashed through his hair, letting the severed locks fall dramatically to the ground. The entire group stood motionless, utterly stunned by his abrupt transformation. Fergus, Belinda, and their companion watched in complete shock as Gillian's appearance dramatically shifted. He now resembled a wild 90s rock star, looking absolutely nothing like the broken man they had seen just moments before. The contrast was so stark that it left everyone in the room speechless. Gillian was standing motionless, showing off the beauty of his gorgeous face like a Greek god. Suddenly, he started walking towards another direction, while Ghislaine looked at him wondering where is he going. Gillian whirled around, his sharp and angry gaze fixed on Ghislaine, as he demanded to know if anyone else was accompanying them or might be on their way. Ghislaine responded matter-of-factly that their current group was complete. Retrieving a long, razor-sharp weapon, Gillian inquired about potential enemies harboring grudges against him. Ghislaine's response was direct and ominous. Not only did such people exist, but their numbers would only increase in the future. Upon hearing this, Gillian unleashed his weapon, which crackled with dark and blue-tinted energy. With tremendous force, he hurled the weapon across his house's interior, demolishing everything in its path. The weapon tore through the wall, creating a gaping hole that extended into the surrounding jungle. Gillian began pulling back the rope attached to the weapon, expecting to retrieve it. Suddenly, in a shocking twist, the weapon disappeared between the body of a mysterious man who had been pierced by it. As Gillian retracted the rope, the wounded individual was simultaneously dragged along, culminating in Gillian grabbing the intruder firmly by the neck. Gillian asked the man about the person who sent him. The men were still alive, trembling in fear. The men wondered about how this was even possible. Holding the mysterious intruder suspended in midair by his neck, Gillian turned to Ghislaine and asked about his intentions. Ghislaine responded confidently that he already knew the origin of this attacker, even without further explanation. Preparing to act, Ghislaine began reaching for his sword, stating he preferred not to dirty his hands with the test. Unexpectedly, Gillian intervened by placing his hand on Ghislaine's sword, stopping him, and catching Ghislaine completely off guard. With a deeply creepy smile, Gillian declared he would handle the situation himself. In a brutally swift motion, he used the immense strength of his arm to crush the intruder's neck, ending the threat instantly. Afterwards, Gillian bowed respectfully to Ghislaine, a gesture that left Alinda utterly bewildered. Her confusion seemed tinged with a hint of jealousy, as though she sensed a new dynamic emerging that might potentially replace her role in the group. Belinda watched with growing concern, deeply troubled by the complete lack of hesitation in Gillian's violent actions. Her unease prompted her to question why the young master would choose to associate himself with such dangerous individuals. Moments later, Gillian knelt before Ghislaine, addressing him with utmost respect as His Highness and the Grand Duke Ghislaine Perdium. The old warrior solemnly declared that from this point forward, his entire life would be dedicated to serving Ghislaine. Recognizing the significance of this moment, Gillian realized he had secured a critical asset for his future plans of territorial reconstruction. A confident smile spreading across his face, he responded by telling Gillian that he would be counting on him moving forward. In a shadowy woodland environment featuring an antiquated constructed building, hushed conversations emerged regarding the complete obliteration of a reconnaissance unit's team. Within the wooden establishment's interior, several individuals dressed in hooded uniforms were positioned strategically. Someone inquired about the previous statement that had been shared among their ranks. Unexpectedly, a scary-looking individual with a distinctive mark traversing his lips commanded absolute silence. The person positioned nearby with an ominous atmosphere surrounding his presence, instructed his companions to maintain minimal vocal communication. This individual was none other than Vigo, the notorious and ruthless wild feline trafficking leader. Following his stern directive, an immediate and profound silence descended upon space, with one of the subordinate members offering a respectful apology directly to their commanding officer. The captain explained that based on Sir Burnough's information, the current strength of young Master Ghislaine's forces should not have been enough to track down the reconnaissance squad, much less eliminate them. He questioned his team, wondering whether the reconnaissance squad had been incompetent, or if the intelligence they'd received was flawed. One of the members hesitantly attempted to explain the situation, mentioning that it appeared Gillian had joined their enemies. This revelation stunned the captain, leaving him visibly shaken, as if he had been struck by a blow. Without warning, the captain seized the member by the neck. His face contorted into a terrifying expression, and his eye glowed an intense red hue like a burning tomato. With a chilling tone, he demanded to know if what he had just heard was true. The captain's grip tightened fiercely around the man's neck, causing him to shake uncontrollably as pain coursed through his body. Trembling and struggling, the man cried out, insisting that he had seen it with his own eyes. Hearing this, the captain's expression darkened as realization struck. Gillian was finally making his move. With a grave tone, he declared to his team that this was the work of his former commander. Meanwhile, Gillian guided the horse cart along the road, while Ghislaine and the others rode in the back. Inside the car, Belinda looked like she was reaching her limit, having eaten far too many cookies. With a strained and peculiar expression, she turned to Ghislaine and pointed out that the man they were dealing with wasn't even an arms merchant. She then questioned why Ghislaine had insisted on bringing so much equipment, commenting that just a few swords and an axe would have been more than enough. Belinda added that because of all the extra supplies, they had been forced to buy an additional carriage. As she chatted away in her usual cheerful manner, Gillian remained silent, quietly listening to all her complaints and remarks. Ghislaine calmly explained to Belinda that, in any case, the carriage was necessary to ensure Rachel could travel comfortably, so it wasn't a big deal. Belinda, however, gave him an odd, almost creepy stare in response. Before long, they reached the rear guard, Fergus and Ricardo. Ghislaine told them that there was a solution for everything and urged them to endure the situation for now, emphasizing the importance of getting out of the canyon safely. It was already midnight as they continued their journey through the dense jungle. While Ghislaine sat there looking unconcerned, Belinda brought up the people who had been watching them earlier, suggesting they were likely sent by Lady Amelia. Ghislaine acknowledged that it was a possibility. Hearing this, Belinda started stressing, realizing it could turn into a serious issue. But then again, Belinda was prone to overthinking, just like many of us. Belinda then mentioned that the mask the person had been wearing symbolized the wild feline traffickers, a notorious and powerful guild operating in Riffold. Her words made Ghislaine's expression turn sharp, clearly taking the information seriously. She went on to explain that the wild feline traffickers were vile scum involved in all sorts of despicable activities, including smuggling, assassinations, drug trade, and human trafficking. Belinda emphasized their strength, pointing out that many of their members were former mercenaries with formidable skills. This made the guild one of the most dangerous and influential dark organizations in the region. Ghislaine casually asked Belinda how she knew so much about the wild feline traffickers, especially since she had only recently been at the castle. With a bit of an amused tone, Belinda, almost like an Asian auntie, replied that she had learned a bit about them before arriving at the castle. Then, Belinda's tone grew serious again as she warned Ghislaine to stay cautious. She stressed that the wild feline traffickers were relentless, like persistent dogs that wouldn't let go once they had a target. To her surprise, Ghislaine simply smiled. At that moment, Gillian chimed in, reassuring everyone that everything would be fine, which caught Belinda's attention. Gillian went on to say that, after all, they had Ghislaine with them. Hearing this, the main character, Ghislaine, looked at him with a proud expression, confident in his own abilities. As the cart sped along, the ground behind them seemed to crack and break apart as if some massive creature was chasing them. Suddenly, two forces of shifting earth appeared on both sides, closing in quickly. This unexpected event immediately caught Gillian's attention, making him alert to the danger of closing in around them. Suddenly, with a deafening roar, the ground beneath their feet cracked open, as if the earth itself had slid apart from the dark abyss below. The same men who had been lurking at the edges of their camp moments before now emerged, their faces twisted with malice. They climbed up from the ground like shadows from the depths. In the blink of an eye, Gillian's instincts kicked in. With a fluid, practiced motion, he unsheathed his sword, the steel glinting in the pale light. He stood tall as he shouted that they are under attack, an ambush from below. The two attackers charged at him simultaneously, Gillian wielding a sword and on the other hand an axe. Without hesitation, Gillian blocked both strikes with ease. Using his immense strength, he swiftly severed the arms of both men in a single motion. Then, with another powerful strike, he decapitated one of them. Afterward, Gillian tossed a half-oddies of the fallen men from the cart, clearing the paths for their continued journey. Just then, another man cut a rope tied to a tree above them, and another let down toward them. As the cart continued to move, Gillian suddenly realized something was coming from above. A massive tree was falling toward them. With urgency, Gillian shouted, warning everyone that it was a trap. Belinda, seeing the danger, grimly stated that at this rate they would definitely be caught. Gillian quickly signaled for the horses to move faster, but before they could escape, huge piles of fallen trees suddenly crashed down in front of them, blocking their way. Ghislaine immediately understood they were walking right into the ambush they had expected. Within moments, several men surrounded them, standing tall and confident, as if they had already caught their prey. Finally, the scar-faced captain stepped forward to meet Gillian, calling Gillian the commander of the Ratatask mercenary group. Gillian, however, didn't seem to care much about who this man was or what he wanted, watching him with a blank, clueless expression. The star-faced captain, gripping his weapon tightly, took a step closer and accused Gillian of being a coward, saying he had dissolved his mercenary group just for the sake of his daughter. Gillian stepped out of the cart and, clearly confused, asked what the captain meant, as he couldn't understand what he was talking about. The captain, his voice growing colder, explained that because of Gillian's actions, he'd been forced to live a life he never wanted. He then taunted Gillian, asking if he had become so senile that he couldn't even remember his old comrades. Gillian stood there, silent, watching the captain carefully, no response. The captain pressed further, demanding if Gillian was still pretending not to know anything. He warned that whether Gillian wanted to or not, he would make him remember. After that, he commanded all of his men to kill them, and just like that, all the men rushed towards them. Seeing the tension, Ghislaine asked Gillian if he needed his help. Gillian, however, calmly reassured him that it was fine. He explained that this man seemed to have some unfinished business with him, so Ghislaine should rest while he handled it on his own. Gillian then drew his axe, taking a steady stance, as the men closed in around him. With a single swift motion, he swung his axe and effortlessly cut down each of the attackers one by one. As more attackers approached from behind, calling him an old geezer, Gillian turned his attention to them. With a swift motion, he slashed one man down. Another rushed forward, but Gillian quickly broke his arm, and with a brutal swing of his axe, cleaved half of his body in two like a beast. The star-faced captain, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but think to himself that Gillian's strength from his mercenary days hadn't faded at all. Realizing this, he gave the order for all units to disperse and surround Gillian from both sides. However, Gillian had other plans. Without hesitation, he grabbed one of the horses from the cart and took off, leaving the attackers dumbfounded by his sudden move. As he rode, he pulled out a long weapon from the horse and began swinging it through the air with ease, charging forward. In one fluid motion, he slashed through anyone who dared to get in his way, cutting them down effortlessly. The attackers were terrified, unable to get close to Gillian. One of them exclaimed that they couldn't even approach him, while others urged them to target the horse. Meanwhile, Gillian swung his axe with incredible precision, slashing down all of the men in one swift blow. Belinda and Ghislaine, watching from the cart, were stunned by Gillian's raw power and skill, admiring how strong and magnificent he was. Suddenly, the scar-faced captain leapt at Gillian from behind. However, Gillian was prepared and used his shield to block the attack. The captain found himself stuck against Gillian's shield. With a cold glare, the scar-faced captain hissed, saying that if Gillian had ruined someone's life, he shouldn't interfere now. Gillian's eyes glowed menacingly as he responded, his voice full of intent. "You'll be the one I kill." The captain in rage jumped and struck several blows at the horse, causing it to collapse. As Gillian dismounted, the captain moved in to strike him with his weapon, but Gillian blocked the blow with his axe. Gillian then coldly told the captain that he was not the commander of the Ratatask Mercenary Corps. With a powerful motion, he used his shield to punch the captain, sending him flying back. The captain landed on his knees, panting, and demanded to know why Gillian wasn't the commander. The scar-faced man was still in disbelief, as he shouted at Gillian to stop talking nonsense. He demanded to know if Gillian wasn't the commander, then who else could it possibly be? Gillian, standing tall and holding his axe with a glowing blue aura surrounding him, calmly replied that he had abandoned the past. He stood there, like a beast ready to strike, the aura around him intensifying. He then declared that he was no longer a commander but just a servant to Ghislaine. This revelation drove the scar-faced man into a frenzy. His eyes widened with rage as he charged at Gillian, screaming that he was going to kill him. And now intense clashes of battle can be seen taking place. The man with the scar on his face continued to strike at Gillian, who bravely held his shield in front of him. Then, the scarred man rushed at Gillian, raising his knife. The force of the attack caused damage to Gillian's shield. As the knife became stuck between Gillian's shield, Villano shouted that the mercenary corps had fallen apart after he left. This statement caught Gillian's attention as he fought to hold off the knife with all his strength. Troubling to maintain control over the weapon, the scarred man continued to yell, blaming Gillian for his lost sense of purpose. He claimed that because of Gillian he had ended up living a miserable life, only surviving day by day. Gillian remained silent, his expression cold, as he chose not to respond to the man's words. In the next moment, Gillian pushed his shield aside with force, knocking the knife from the man's hand and sending him stumbling back for a brief moment. Philanos turned around, lifting his leg to prepare for a powerful kick. He then launched his kick straight at Gillian, but the older managed to block the brutal blow with his shield. The force of the kick was so intense that it shattered the shield Gillian was holding. Gillian was shocked to see the shield tear apart, a large hole now visible in it. Bolanos called out Gillian's name, declaring that he had been willing to give his entire life to the Ratatask Mercenary Corps, dedicating everything he had to it. After stepping back, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen comrades, he continued to shout at Gillian, accusing him of throwing it all away to become nothing more than a servant for a corrupt noble. He then turned evil, with his eye glowing low and completely red like a tomato, and after lifting his hand, which was carrying 3 sharp blades, he tells Gillian that he cannot forgive him. Afterwards, he threw those 3 blades at him. With a single swift of his axe, Gillian managed to dodge the blades, moving them to the ground. Suddenly, Philanos lunged at Gillian from above, aiming his blade. Gillian quickly reacted, dodging the attack by stepping to the side, and just as Gillian was about to hit him using his axe, the man twisted in midair, and as Gillian charged forward with his axe, the star-faced man's knife collided with it. A scary-looking man smiled, shouting out Gillian's name. As their weapons clashed, he remarked that no matter how strong Gillian was now, that strength was from a time long ago when he was still the mercenary commander. Then Villanos leapt behind Gillian out of his sight and continued, saying that while Gillian had hesitated over his daughter's treatment, he himself had grown stronger through countless battles. Villanos landed precisely where the 3 blades were stuck in the ground. He then told Gillian that he was no longer a match for him. Gillian looked in his direction, wondering the man was planning next. The scar-faced man, using his knife, sent the blades flying toward Gillian. The blades moved through the air like a set of coins on a mission, quickly heading his way. Gillian reacted just in time, raising his arm to block the blades, which struck the armor on his arm. Suddenly, Villanos charged at Gillian again, catching him completely off guard. Despite the surprise attack, Gillian managed to strike at the right moment, but Villanos jumped high into the air, narrowly dodging the blow. Villanos charged at Gillian with overwhelming power, his eyes glowing with intense sharpness. He shouted that this would end once and for all. However, surrounded by a bright light, Gillian gripped the edge of the sword, completely blocking the force of the attack. Standing firm like a beast, Gillian held his ground against the sword strike and calmly asked Villanos if this was really why he had sought revenge on him. Villanos was shocked and terrified, wondering if Grayan had blocked his attack by wrapping his hand in mana. He also realized with a sinking feeling that Gillian hadn't even been using his full strength throughout their entire fight. Before he could process this, Gillian swiftly struck him in the face with his axe. The blow was so brutal and forceful that it sent Villanos flying backward, crashing into a nearby tree. The star-faced man, hit by the tree, fell to his knees, clutching his face in pain. Gillian, walking toward him, spoke, saying that the man clearly didn't understand anything. As he held his knife, Gillian thought to himself that if the man had truly wanted revenge, he had plenty of chances to strike. With a sharp and cold expression on his face, Gillian wondered why Villanos hadn't come to kill him earlier. Suddenly, Villanos began laughing maniacally, telling Gillian that he didn't know the full story at all. Gillian stood there silently, wondering what kind of delusions the man was having. The man, bleeding heavily from his face, then told Gillian that he had already visited his house. But when he arrived, the commander of the Ratatost Mercenary Corps wasn't there. All he found was an old man who wasn't even worth killing. In a fit of rage, the man's eyes glowed red and his pupils widened as he screamed, asking where the Gillian he once idolized had gone. Gillian remained silent as his expression was like some poker face still on the ground. Villanos looked at Gillian with confusion as the older man spoke, telling him to listen. Gillian then reached for the sword on his back, drawing it slowly, as he said that like the scar-faced man, he too was just a body driven by someone else. But right now he was as insane as the man before him. Gillian raised his sword high into the air, holding another weapon in his other hand. His expression calm and determined. Like a true hero, he told Villanos that he would give his old comrade the greatest honor before looking at with an intense gaze and declared, as the commander of the Ratatosk Mercenary Corps. The star-faced dog felt amazed to hear that, and he then charged towards Gillian, saying that this now feels like a real fight. Gillian managed to dodge the attack from that crazy guy. Using his sword, the guy shouted, saying, "This is the moment he has been waiting for." His mouth looked as if he had worked in circus. Afterwards, the air crackles with tension, as two of them stand locked in an intense battle. On the left, Gillian strikes, his weapon cutting through the air, trailing arcs of explosive energy in its weight. Across from him, the clown stands his ground. As the two weapons clashes, a burst of light erupts from the impact, the force sending shockwaves through the space between them. As Gillian advanced, swinging his sword, Villanos swiftly dodged the attack. Villanos then kicked at Gillian, but the older man was too quick and managed to dodge it. In a flash, Villanos lunged forward with his knife, but Gillian blocked it with his axe, narrowly avoiding the strike. Not wasting any time, Gillian moved in closer, driving his sword into the man's ribs. The blow caused intense pain and blood began to soak the area as Villanos was in pain. Furious, Villanos charged at Gillian without hesitation, but Gillian expertly dodged the attack. In response, Gillian grew enraged and swung his axe at the man. As he did, he coldly remarked that he would remember him, the captain of the 5th unit of the Ratatost Mercenary Corps. However, Villanos guy kept looking at Gillian with somewhat emotions like some evil witch. Gillian looked at him with honor and pain as he called his name out. Villanos finally smiled as he got his greatest honor and probably his only wish. Suddenly, there was a blood splash and the body of Villanos was on the ground. Beside him was a knife. Gillian picked up the knife, standing solemnly in front of the lifeless body of Villanos, who had died with honor. Suddenly, a voice of Ghislaine comes, telling Ghislaine that he did a great job. Gillian looks behind. As Belinda and Ghislaine walked towards him, Belinda remarked that if they sold all the loot, they would make a lot of money. Gillian bowed to Ghislaine, apologizing for taking longer than necessary. However, Ghislaine, ever the kind-hearted started leader, reassured him that it was fine. Ghislaine observed him with sharp eyes, realizing that Gillian was far more extraordinary than he had anticipated. When Ghislaine first began working as a mercenary after leaving home, the stories he had heard about Gillian from his superiors helped lay the foundation for him to eventually become the mercenary king. Gillian is glad that he acted quickly, because of that he gained a reliable ally. Afterwards, Ghislaine asks him if he remembered who that guy was. Moving the knife which Villanos had, Gillian replied that he does. As he was an old comrade of his, cheering that Ghislaine wondered about what his old comrades must be doing right now, as before meeting him, they must be living their own lives. Ghislaine then wondered that someday, they all would have to come back. Afterwards, Ghislaine casually asks that they should gather the valuables from these guys as Belinda suggested. Belinda, who was as greedy as a new barber, tells him that it sounds like a great idea. She then tells Gillian to lead the way to collect them, but Gillian tells her that he is not her subordinate or anything. 2 days later, the group of clowns was traveling through the Perdium territory in their cart. As they approached, Belinda expressed her excitement, happy to finally be arriving. However, Gillian, looking around, asked him if this was really Perdium. Ghislaine didn't seem happy to be there. With a sad expression, he told Graydon that they were indeed in the Perdium territory. He reflected that it was good to know there was a place to return to, as he had always believed he could come back when he left. Gillian stayed silent, his gaze scanning the surroundings. After a moment, Ghislaine asked him what he thought of the territory at first glance, expecting a negative response. He figured Gillian might call it trash, but Gillian casually replied that it was a great place. Ghislaine then asks him, if is it trash? This terrified the great lord of the fighters Gillian. Ghislaine then tells him that the houses are old, and repairs are out of the questions. He then asks if he see those fields over there, as they are left and tilled, since all the people who could work were sent to the army and forced to leave the land fallow. Gillian then tells him that he heard Perdium is constantly at war with the northern barbarians, but seeing it in person, the situation is worse than he expected. Blind casually interferes, asking if this is a territory someone should know well about. Suddenly, Ghislaine told them that he would resolve all those problems, and that's why he needed their help. Belinda and Gillian fell silent, both shocked by his words. Ghislaine, deep in thought, realized that it would be a long and difficult battle, one that involved eliminating everything connected to Duke Delphine, and fighting to protect what had once been taken for granted. Ghislaine looked at his Perdium, knowing that he will restore the territory, no matter what it takes. Afterwards, they finally entered the Perdium. Suddenly, Belinda shouted in shock, as if she had seen a ghost. She pointed and told Ghislaine that there was someone over there. Ghislaine, caught off guard by her sudden outburst, decided to take a look. Gregalight sulked as if he lost his mind or something, as the person he just saw was none other than his own father, who looked like a reincarnation of Thor. Ghislaine stared in disbelief at the sight of his father standing before him. Out of all the people in the world, it had to be his overly strict, no-nonsense father, Count Walter Perdium. The Count regarded Ghislaine as if he were nothing more than a lowly peasant who had just soiled his expensive carpets. At the Grand Castle Perdium, Ghislaine and his father convened with a group of officials in Ghislaine's quarters to discuss pressing matters. The conversation quickly devolved into a heated argument. One official proposed reducing military forces, while another suggested requesting additional support from the Red Fold. However, an elderly official revealed that the Red Fold had cut ties with them and was preoccupied with recruiting soldiers and amassing food supplies for their own purposes. The officials lamented their unfortunate predicament, conceding that they had no alternative but to diminish Night forces in order to reconstruct the Beast Forest fortress that had been damaged during the previous Orc attack. They expressed concerns about the dangers of weakening their defenses against the notoriously brutal Orcans. Ghislaine observed the debate in silence, a smirk playing on his lips as he mused that this was just like old times. The same group of officials, Randolph the Knight Commander, Albert the Finance Officer with the unfortunate rectangular forehead, and Hamuru the dull administrator, still arguing about the same as old issues. Ghislaine reflected on how, as the young Perdium master, only a brief period had elapsed for him. However, as the battle-hardened mercenary king, he possessed decades of experience that made this entire scene feel like a mere echo of his past life. With his impressive scars and world-weary demeanor, Ghislaine exuded the aura of a formidable leader who had witnessed countless trials and wasn't easily intimidated. Snapping out of his thoughts, Ghislaine interferes to express his gratitude to everyone for their diligent efforts. Ghislaine specifically addressed his father, causing everyone in the room to abruptly fall silent. His father was taken aback and didn't understand where Ghislaine was coming from. Confused, he simply uttered, what? Ghislaine reflected on his childhood, remembering how he had really disliked his father for being so strict and severe. Now as Ghislaine narrowed his eyes and looked at his father, he could see the countless signs of fatigue and exhaustion weighing on the Count's shoulders. The immense responsibility of being a noble had taken its toll. A maniacal greenish seemed to emanate from Count Perdium, a manifestation of the guilt, responsibility and deep depression that he carried as the king. It was as if everything that burdened him had coalesced into a tangible presence. The Count's eyes were soulless and hollow, lacking even pupils, a husk of the man he once was. Count Perdium, always one for conversation, sipped his tea, and nonchalantly inquired about Ghislaine's whereabouts over the past week. When Ghislaine mentioned visiting Rafal territory, his father raised a suspicious eyebrow and questioned whether he had stirred up any trouble, as if Ghislaine were an unruly child incapable of being left unsupervised. Ghislaine feigned innocence, despite having just embarked on a thrilling adventure worthy of a bard's tale, assembling a mercenary group, exploring treacherous lands, and even engaging in a duel with a self-proclaimed king boy. However, he knew better than to disclose such exciting details to his disapproving father. The officials began interrogating Ghislaine about rumors that he had profited from betting on his duel with the king boy. Ghislaine privately considered it a strategic investment, but kept that thought to himself, claiming instead that he simply had some mundane business to attend to with his bay. The officials launched into a lecture about how Ghislaine needed to uphold his esteemed role as the Perdium heir and refrain from reckless behavior. Ghislaine brushed off their concerns, much to the annoyance of the elder officials. Shut up with that. Count Perdium called for order and confronted Ghislaine about defeating the traitorous knights Jome and Philip, who had dared to attempt selling Elena to the highest bidder. The officials doubted that Ghislaine had personally confronted them, suspecting that the story had been embellished in retelling. Ghislaine, being a goat strategist, played along and kept the specifics vague, not wanting to raise further suspicions by giving too much information. Then, in a surprising turn of events that nearly caused Ghislaine to lose his composure, his father actually praised him. The Count expressed his relief that Elena was safe, regardless of the circumstances surrounding her rescue. Emboldened Ghislaine decided to seize the opportunity and request a favor. The official scoffed, presuming the young master was merely attempting to secure an early allowance to finance more of his infamous exploits. Asters the officer got heated at him, shouting at him that he sold military supplies and lost them in bets, set fire to the castle gates out of a bad moon, even killed the warhorses to roast their meals, and melted the knight's armor to forge a so-called legendary sword. Ghislaine was so dumbfounded to hear that, as if he never did such a things. Ghislaine turned back with a cheerful grin, casually remarking that he hadn't actually been seeking permission, but had merely brought it up out of politeness, as he had already made up his mind to proceed regardless of anyone's opinion. Belina, whose presence seemed utterly devoid of any command, aura, curiously inquired what was so significant about the matter that he appeared entirely consumed by it. Ghislaine, however, didn't spare even a moment to explain, confidently stating that he would share the details with her later when the time was right. Adopting a more thoughtful and serious expression, he mulled over the potential consequences, silently concluding that revealing the information at this moment could spark unnecessary gossip. He reasoned that if the project turned out to be a success, it had the potential to generate an extraordinary fortune. Since it's not far from the entrance to the Beast Forest, that place was a mineral imbued with a magical power runestone, as it's an extremely rare mineral that drives mages crazy, and it's used in everything, from magical tools, magical circles, and magic scrolls, to magical and alchemical research, anywhere magic is applied. In his past life, it was discovered by the Delphine family, but now only he knows this information. Belinda sighed in defeat, her hope fading away as she realized arguing was completely useless. She reluctantly acknowledged that Ghislaine surely had everything meticulously stand out. Even Gillian, the loyal and proud servant, bowed his head and vowed to obey Ghislaine's commands without question. Ghislaine instructed Belinda to head to the nearby guild and enlist approximately 200 mercenaries. Belinda couldn't help but remark to herself that Ghislaine clearly had no intention of saving any of the hard-earned money he had acquired. Gillian cautioned him about the unpredictable and tough nature of mercenaries, warning that if he gathered too many, they might attempt to overthrow their employer. Ghislaine conceded that Gillian had a point, but declared that Gillian would personally seek out the most useful and skilled mercenaries. They are mentioned a small but highly skilled mercenary group to the north. Gillian was taken aback, realizing Ghislaine was referring to the notorious lunatic dogs. While acknowledging their powers, Gillian warned that if things went awry, they would turn on each other and their employers like frenzied wolves. Ghislaine merely smiled, confirming that the mercenary corps of Cerberus was indeed their target. As they journeyed to the Cerberus mercenary camp, Ghislaine rode atop his horse while Gillian walked alongside him. They eventually reached the camp, marked by a sign bearing the Cerberus Guild emblem of rusty blades bound by chains. The camp itself was a chaotic mess, with tents, supplies, and piles of wood strewn about haphazardly. The warriors lounged around, fought amongst themselves, or simply went about their own business. A mercenary lounged near the camp, carefully observing Ghislaine and Gillian as they approached from afar. His gaze remained fixed through the telescope as he leaned over to inform his companion, who lay sprawled beside him with a tilted hat shielding his face. He casually marked that the two were finally arriving. His partner shifted slightly, lifting the brim of his hat with a smirk, and sarcastically wondered if these newcomers had the slightest clue about the situation they were walking into. The mercenary kept his eyes glued to the telescope, a sly grin spreading across his face, as he said that the approaching pair looked like inexperienced wanderers who had no idea where they were going. He added, with growing anticipation that if their luck held, they might just reel in a significant catch. However, before he could relish the thought any further, a hand suddenly exploded the lens with brutal force. The shocking attack tore a blood-curdling stream from his throat, a sound so piercing that it immediately drew the attention of every mercenary in the camp, even the startling one who was in the middle of mercilessly beating someone. The group watched in disbelief as Gillian, his strong muscular hands trembling with fury, grabbed the mercenary holding the telescope. His grip closed around the man's face, lifting him effortlessly off the ground with one hand. The mercenary screamed in pain, his voice filled with confusion as he questioned what had caused the old man to act this way. Gillian, showing no hesitation, swung the man around by his head like a rag doll, hurling him across the camp with terrifying force. The impact created a shockwave, leaving the mercenary sprawled on the ground, groaning in pain. The remaining mercenaries reacted instantly, their expressions darkening as their glowing red eyes locked onto Gillian. They armed themselves swiftly, getting their gear and raising weapons, their stands turning menacing. Murmurs rippled through the group as they accused Gillian of losing his sanity. One particularly bald mercenary, clad in heavy armor and carrying a spiked vow connected to a chain and sickle, stepped forward to confront him. He acknowledged Gillian's apparent status as a noble but made it clear that such an attack was unacceptable. With a sharp edge in his voice, he warned Gillian that no one who behaved like this should expect to walk out of their camp alive. As the armored mercenary approached Gillian, he suddenly paused, noticing something that caught his eye. He spotted Ghislaine sitting atop of his horse like a fearless noble, looking down upon the mercenaries. Ghislaine demanded to know who the leader of the camp was. When Ghislaine reached the scene, his piercing gaze locked onto the man as he demanded to know who the homeless guy was in charge. The tension in the air grew thick and silent, only to be broken by the unsettling laughter of the strange, eerie man. With a smirk, the man began twirling his weapon skillfully, mockingly remarking that it appeared some lunatic nobleman had shown up. The man gripping his weapon lunged at Ghislaine, taunting that if he wanted to start trouble he had better be prepared to deal with the consequences. Without hesitation, the man hurled his sharp weapon toward Ghislaine. The weapon, attached to a steel chain, sped through the air with deadly intent. Ghislaine, however, remained calmly seated on his horse, showing no reaction as the weapon hurtled toward him. Just as it seemed the weapon would strike, a sudden, precise strike cut through the chain from the side. The one who intervened was none other than Gillian the goat. He stood tall and imposing, his figure reminiscent of a Greek god with his sword firmly pointed at the severed chain. The nearby knights watched in stunned silence, unable to believe the scene unfolding before their eyes. The homeless guy, equally shocked, struggled to comprehend how Gillian had managed to wedge his sword so perfectly between the steel chains. Moments later, the chained weapon clattered to the ground with a metallic thud. Ghislaine, maintaining his composure, turned to Gillian and remarked that as he had expected they weren't going to heed his words. With a cold, deadly expression, Ghislaine instructed Gillian to do as he pleased but made it clear that killing them was not an option. Standing tall, radiating a charismatic aura, Gillian remained poised and ready, his stance prepared to take on their opponents without hesitance. Gillian tightened his grip on the chain and swung it forcefully, dragging the homeless guy closer to him with an unstoppable pull. The homeless guy, whose arm was bound by the chain, stumbled helplessly toward Gillian. His face etched with confusion as he realized his fate was sealed. Without hesitation, Gillian hurled the homeless guy into the air, sending him flying. As the homeless guy spun through the air, the heavy portion of the chain followed, swinging wildly alongside him. The weighty end of the chain struck Gillian's neck with a loud crash. Even under the force of the blow, Gillian remained unshaken, standing tall as if the attack had done nothing to him. Without hesitation, Gillian slammed the homeless guy brutally onto the ground, the sheer force of the impact leaving the scene in stunned silence. The damage was devastating. In an instant, the homeless guy's knights rushed toward Gillian, shouting angrily and accusing him of being a madman. They questioned if he thought his noble status would allow him to stand by unchallenged while causing such chaos. However, Gillian didn't give a shit about what they had to say. He swings the homeless guy again using the chain, and this time he smashes the homeless guy onto the knights. Just as Gillian hurled them against the nearby wall, the impact shattered it entirely. Afterward, he cast a sharp, disdainful glance at the others, much like an annoyed Uncle Mike Lair at a baby crying incessantly. The knights standing nearby were visibly horrified, their bodies trembling uncontrollably in the face of Gillian's overwhelming presence. Moments later, Ghislaine dismounted from his horse with deliberate steps. Ghislaine then stood beside Gillian, whose one hand was placed on the sword handle which was equipped behind his back. Greycag individuals and deeply disappointed by their uncivilized behavior. Ghislaine looked at them sharply, saying they should get rid of their lackeys and bring out their boss. Suddenly, someone said that this was disturbing him when he was sleeping peacefully. The entire atmosphere turned completely different, as the knights out of nowhere got attentive, and in their stances. The person then starts walking, saying that he is Kachor, the commander of the Cerberus mercenary group. Afterwards, he stood there looking like a Rizzler with some charismatic personality. He asks them about what business do they have with him. Ghislaine told him that there couldn't be any other reason someone would visit a mercenary group, as the reason he is here is to make a request. Kor asks about what request does he want, as what kind of person comes to make a request and leaves his men in this condition. Kor then glanced at them with the tender expression of someone looking at his own baby girl. He questioned whether, as nobles, they should not exhibit better manners. In response, Ghislaine smiled and explained that Kor should consider this his unique way of saying hello, adding that he believed the best greeting was one that made the other submit. Kor spat out his gum and asked what exactly submit meant. He then questioned if greeting someone twice meant he was preparing to start a war or something of that nature. Nevertheless, he made it clear that he was willing to listen to Ghislaine's request. Inside Kaor's office, Ghislaine took a seat across from Kaor, who leaned back and asked what grand request had brought him there. Ghislaine began speaking about the monster forest, immediately catching Karl's attention, though the room remained eerily silent. As Ghislaine elaborated further, he revealed his intent to hire Kaor to develop the monster forest. Suddenly, the calm atmosphere broke into chaos, with the knights murmuring anxiously about the infamous forest overrun with monsters. Karol grinned and asked what sort of person dared to interfere with such a dangerous place. In response, Ghislaine calmly introduced himself as Ghislaine Perdium, Duke of the Perdium territory. Kaor was shocked about hearing that this was Ghislaine. Suddenly, the room went into a chaos mode, as the knights couldn't believe that he is the famous Ghislaine. They murmured about how he is so famous, and his actions were insane. Asking someone like him wants to develop the monster forest. However, Kaor called Ghislaine out, saying he must have been soiled rotten not to know what the monster forest is like. Unfortunately, that place is not for a pampered loser like him. Cugino then moved his hand, telling Ghislaine that the negation is over. However, Ghislaine was completely silent, and so was the Gil line. Suddenly, Ghislaine asks Kaor if he was scared, hearing that Kaor got shocked and stunned. Ghislaine further asks him that he heard his mercenary group was quite skilled. He asks if that was just an exaggerated rumor or something. Kaor then placed his foot on the table, causing some damage. Like a king, telling Ghislaine not to be arrogant, like he said they are a mercenary group, and if the price isn't right, they simply won't take the job. However, Ghislaine with some cold expression told him that weak people always have excuses for everything. However, Kuro remained silent for some time. He then told Ghislaine that he has spoiled his mood as he was going to entertain him, but now he has resorted to amateur provocation. As a kid like him who doesn't understand how the world works isn't even worth killing, so he will let him do, but he has to pay for the damages he caused and leave. Ghislaine remained silent for a moment before calmly stating that it would not unfold as Kor might expect. Then, with a steady gaze, he directly addressed Kor by name, declaring that he was formally challenging him to Moriana's recognition, cheering that everyone in the room got extremely shocked, including Gillian and the knights. Kor's anger flared as he demanded to know if Ghislaine truly understood the implications of his challenge. With his blue eyes glowing fiercely, Ghislaine firmly replied that he was fully aware of what it meant. He explained that Moriana's recognition was an ancient and brutal tradition among mercenaries. In duel, once both participants agreed they would fight using only daggers with their arms tied together. Leaving the small circle marking the duel's boundaries was considered an instant loss. The confined space and restricted movement made the fight a test of survival. The tradition was so unforgiving that in many instances both the victor and the defeated ended up dead. Grisheline further tells Kaur that the loser must acknowledge defeat and fully obey the winner's orders, and so the loser becomes the winner's dog. Ghislaine then happily asks Kaur about his opinion on all this. Meanwhile, Gillian, who was observing everything, realized that the Honorable Duke using a dirty mercenary custom, since in the mercenary world, refusing this challenge is equivalent to admitting their weakness, so there is no way to decline it. Afterwards, Kaor started smiling like a maniac. The entire atmosphere of the room turned dark all of a sudden. Karuluko, looking extremely dark and insane, then called out his comrade, telling them that it seems this honorable noble of theirs wants to earn his recognition mercenary style, so they are happy to oblige. Afterwards, their hands were completely tied to each other, and Kaor were standing in middle of the ground, ready to attack each other like some sharp animals. The crowd behind Gillian kept chanting for Kayar as he would get what he deserves. Kaur smirked and told Ghislaine that it seemed he had been keeping a few tricks up his sleeve and now thought he could stand against him without fear. With no room left for retreat, Kaor made his stance clear. Without warning, Kaor suddenly pulled Ghislaine toward him, catching him off guard and leaving him momentarily confused. Leaning in close, Kaor whispered that he had already done this 5 times before. In response, Ghislaine quickly countered by pulling Kayar to his side, turning the tables and leaving him just as baffled. With a calm but firm voice, Ghislaine stated that he had done this hundreds of times. So that's where our story ends. If you want me to continue this series, then like and comment, and I will continue. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more exciting story. Thank you.